Chapter 739. In the wizard world, the construction of any wizard tower would have a great impact on its surroundings. This impact was not only on the environment, but also on the concept of the territory of the wizard pagoda. The area where the power of the wizard pagoda extended was the territory that the controller of the wizard pagoda could control and own. This simple concept was etched into the soul and consciousness of every wizard, making them believe in it unswervingly. Thus, when the wizard pagoda was going to appear in the icy wind territory, all the factions of the northern witches received the news, and the winter witches were the most shocked. After all, this vast land originally belonged to the winter witches, but due to some indescribable reasons, it passed into the hands of the destiny witches. Now, the detestable wizard under the banner of the destiny witches planned to build a wizard pagoda here. This was clearly beyond the expectations of the winter witches. The winter witches were a faction that had risen again after some ups and downs, and the current leader of the faction was only at level 3. Therefore, their overall strength might be much better than the destiny witches, but compared to the other witches' factions, they were still much weaker. After the messengers were sent away by the ice maiden Shefu, the winter witches could only acquiesce to this fact. They would forever lose control of the icy wind territory and its surrounding territories, and if they wanted to enter the Black Forest from the icy wind territory again, they would inevitably have to depend on the destiny witches. Thus, under the surprised and curious gazes of the many witches, the wizard pagoda in the icy wind territory was finally opened. It had to be said that the opening of every wizard pagoda's elemental altar was shocking. Even though Grimm had experienced it twice, he still could not suppress his restlessness when he saw it again. Even his mental consciousness could not help but fluctuate with the fluctuations of the tower's elemental elements. When Grimm completed the activation of the tower soul in the control hall on the 11th floor of the tower alone, rays of elemental light rings began to appear from the base of the tower, then lit up the tower layer by layer, and gradually transmitted to the top of the tower. As the defensive wizard spell on the tower was of the ice element, most of the elemental particles gathered were ice particles. A large number of ice particles were like tiny specks of light, hovering around the periphery of the wizard's pagoda, gradually gathering into a small snowstorm. Looking from afar, the entire wizard's pagoda was hidden in a vast expanse of white snow, making it difficult for one to get a full view of it. This was only because the wizard's pagoda's elemental altar had just been activated and did not have enough elemental energy reserves. That was why he could only maintain the ice storm within 100 meters of the wizard's pagoda. With the daily operation of the wizard's pagoda, when the energy at the bottom of the pagoda had accumulated enough elemental reserves, this kind of snowstorm could even extend 10 miles away. Just like that, anyone hostile to the wizard's pagoda could only endure the onslaught of the snowstorm as they attacked the wizard's pagoda. As the master of the wizard's pagoda, Grimm could even pour in more elemental energy to strengthen the strength and range of the storm in certain areas. Thus, any operation to attack the wizard's pagoda would have to pay a huge price. For the opening ceremony of the wizard's pagoda today, many scarlet wizards had been teleported here from the central part of the continent. That was why this place was unusually lively. As for the prospective sorcerers and apprentices, they had spent 2 to 3 months traversing the Black Forest to reach this place. Just as the group gathered in front of the wizard's pagoda, sensing the minute changes in the surrounding elemental particles, the door of the wizard's pagoda opened, and Grimm walked out. As a level 2 wizard, Grimm was undoubtedly at the peak of his life. His appearance had almost solidified into what it was now. He had the youthfulness of a young man, but also the maturity and capability of a middle-aged man. With his life experience, he had not even passed the first 100 years of his long life. There was still a lot of good time waiting for him to enjoy and savor. Thus, when he stepped out of the wizard's pagoda, bathed in the rings of magic power, all the wizards could not help but hold their breaths for a moment. Come in. From now on, this will be our new home. Hearing Grimm's excited words, all the scarlet wizards present could not help but cheer in joy. After accumulating enough strength, the Crimson family finally took a firm and solid step outwards. With a shred of curiosity and excitement, all the wizards and apprentices swarmed into the Wizard's Pagoda. Even though it was a world of ice and snow outside, they would be faced with a beautiful world that was as warm as spring once they passed through the light screen. In the center of the first level of the Wizard's Pagoda was a spacious and bright wizard hall. In front of it was a spacious library. Even through the wizard light screen, one could vaguely see the many shelves filled with wizard spellbooks. On the two sides of the library were clean and tidy magical huts. The spiral staircase leading to the second level of the Wizard's Pagoda was in the corner of the hall. The floor of the entire hall was made of smooth and clean obsidian. There were also mysterious magical patterns and strange wizard runes carved on it. Every time a sorcerer apprentice walked on it, their own wizard power would converge with a magic energy flowing in the wizard formation, creating some mysterious and beautiful lights and shadows. Perhaps it was a little girl running around barefooted, or a lively deer, or a dancing flower fairy, or a little dragon whelp that was spitting out flames. When a wizard or apprentice walked through the hall, these strange creatures would appear and disappear, accompanied by all sorts of strange noises and stunning light effects. To the sorcerers, these were just the simplest light and shadow illusory spells that were not even worth mentioning. However, for the acolytes who had yet to become sorcerers, this was the power of sorcery that they yearned for in their dreams. Beautiful yet illusory, absurd yet real, leaving behind a group of prospective wizards and apprentices to slowly explore and adapt to the new Wizard's Pagoda. Grimm brought the wizards of his family to the short-distance teleportation formation and arrived at the fifth level of the Wizard's Pagoda. When everyone was seated in the conference hall, Grimm's fiery gaze swept across their faces. With the Scarlet family's current scale of development, the wizards within it needed to be split up and distributed appropriately. There was not much room for the blazing flame monarch to show off. It was said that the scattered Tower Forest Society had even sent a noble leader to fight the Scarlet family for the territory around the Wizard's Pagoda. Hence, Grimm wanted to take advantage of the situation and transfer most of the family's main forces to the north. Gargamel and the forest demon Ava remained in the Scarlet Throne to manage the affairs there, while Meryl was transferred from the Gnome Dimension by Grimm to manage the daily affairs of the new Wizard's Pagoda. As for the Gnome Dimension, Medusa was in charge of managing it. With this, the Crimson family's power network was slowly expanded. The Scarlet Throne Wizard's Pagoda was managed by Gargamel, assisted by the forest demon Ava, Amelia, and the Manticore Sharon. Ollie was stationed there, while Grimm spent most of his time training there. The new Wizard's Pagoda in the north was managed by Meryl, assisted by the Ice Lady Chef, the Worm Wizard Bliss, and the Wind Wizard Dracula. Mary and the Bloodbreeds she led were stationed there. The Gnome Dimension was managed by Medusa, assisted by the Gnome Tigul. The Lance Dimension was managed by the Brain Monster Gazlu, assisted by the Dragon Man Zacha. Most of the daily affairs in the area were managed by Level 1 wizards, while none of the Level 2 wizards in the family were given any specific tasks. All they had to do was train and raise their abilities. This would make it easier for the family to transfer them out when needed. For the first time, the Witches of Destiny had joined the family as new members, taking part in the management of the apprentices and the daily affairs of the family. Alice had also said that she would send another batch of witch apprentices here to train after the new Wizard Pagoda was on the right track. From the day the new Wizard's Pagoda was built, the Scarlet family and the Witches of Destiny would officially begin. Teacher, the new Wizard's Pagoda has already been built. We can't possibly not have a name. What name do you think we should give it? As the manager of the new Wizard's Pagoda, Meryl was naturally the most concerned about this problem. Grimm looked around at the group, hesitating for a moment. White Tower. Let's call it White Tower. Lance Dimension, Thunder Dragon's territory. At the peak of the undulating mountains, there was a magnificent and exquisite palace. Most of the buildings in the palace were tall and majestic, and the decorations in the palace were far more beautiful than the palaces of emperors. At this moment, The Thunder Dragon Arms had once again transformed into his human form on an open-air platform on the east side of the palace. He wore a thin silk robe and reclined on a soft couch, enjoying the attentive attentions of 4 or 5 elf beauties beside him. He was also enjoying the performance of the dancers below him. 2 of the 5 elf beauties were massaging his legs, and one of them was peeling the skin of a grape and feeding it to him with a smile. As for the other 2, one of them was holding a glass of amber wine, and when he signaled for her to take a sip, the other was holding a jade plate for him to spit out the grape seeds. Even though this group of forest elves from the Fair Dimension were trying to please him, they still had bitter and resentful expressions on their faces. However, just as Arm's gaze became more and more dreary, and he was about to enter the house with the elf beauties, a resonant dragon roar came from the distant horizon. Following that, strong winds howled in the sky, and a giant dragon, shimmering with emerald light, descended on the open-air platform. As the emerald dragon flapped its wings violently a few times, a small tornado was immediately set off on the platform beneath it. Soft reclining chairs, gorgeous gauze curtains, wine pots, incense burners, round fans, tea tables, fruits, pears, everything, including the beautiful elves who were covered in gauze, were blown away by the gale, unable to maintain their composure. The giant emerald dragon let out a long breath, and blue mist surged. She used the dragon transformation technique to transform into a tall, slender, and beautiful woman wearing emerald armor. Arms, look at what you've done. Oomph. Chapter 740. Seeing that it was Aratina, Arms, who looked like a handsome middle-aged noble, showed a trace of awkwardness on his face. He stood up and forced a smile. My darling, didn't you go to look for a place you like to stay? How was it? Did you find anything? You've bragged so much about Lance, but I just realized that it's already full of dragons. Aratina's face was full of resentment. I flew for almost 10,000 kilometers in one go and found 1 or 2 places I like. However, they're already owned, and I couldn't find a single place without a master. Seeing that his new love was so angry, Arms quickly went up and wrapped his arm around her slender waist. Didn't I tell you before? Don't worry about whether it's owned or not. Just remember to tell me when you come back. As long as it's not the direct subordinates of those grade 4 big shots, I'll definitely get it for you. Are you serious? Hearing this, Aratina's pretty face, which had been cold all this time, finally showed a trace of joy. Of course I am. Arms couldn't help but pat his chest and boast again. You've been in Lance for some time now, so you should have seen my power and influence here. As long as I guarantee it, there won't be any problems. You better be telling the truth, or else. Aratina looked around at the elven beauties on the platform, and her slender, jade-like hand silently pinched Arms' waist. I'm going to settle the score with you here. Although Arms had an extraordinary physique, he couldn't withstand such a strong, penetrative close-range attack. He hurriedly bared his teeth and said fawningly, Of course. As long as it's from my darling, I'll definitely get it for you. That's good. I've taken a fancy to a place called the Forest of Ancient Trees. There's a grade 2 wood dragon there. Hurry up and chase it away. Forest of Ancient Trees? Wood dragon? Arms muttered to himself, feeling that something was wrong. Isn't there a huge lake nearby? Yes. I also think that the lake is too beautiful. It's perfect for me to play and bathe in it. The moment this was mentioned, the emerald dragon beauty, Aratina's green eyes, were immediately filled with an intoxicated look. Arm's expression immediately fell as he said awkwardly, Darling, do you think you should choose another place? Why should I choose again? What happened there? There. Although that grade 2 wood dragon strength is average, it has a grade 3 gemstone dragon behind it. We can't afford to provoke it. What are you afraid of? The master behind him is a tier 3, and you're also a tier 3. With me, do you think we can't defeat them? For some reason, perhaps it was because she had been stifled in the Fairn Plain for too long, but after suddenly leaving her family, Aratina actually became especially aggressive. Arm's face was filled with hesitation and fear at the mention of fighting a gemstone dragon. It couldn't be helped. Even if they were both Tier 3, there was still a huge gap between their individual strengths. Those gem dragons might not be powerful in other aspects, but they were top-notch in terms of magical defense. The gem armor around their bodies was simply the bane of magic. No elemental spell could penetrate this layer of armor and harm their bodies. Moreover, the rainbow spray of the gemstone dragons covered almost all elemental systems. Therefore, if one didn't have a full-spectrum magic armor like the gemstone dragons, they could only take a beating without being able to fight back. Therefore, when fighting a gemstone dragon, long-range draconic magic and mid-range dragon breath were almost useless. Only the sharp claws and fangs of the dragon could cause some damage to them. In order to do that, Arms would have to endure the rainbow spray of the gemstone dragons and fight them in close combat. Even if he could win, he would be greatly weakened if he continued to pester them like this. Unfortunately, a stubborn woman was not that easy to negotiate with. The female dragon was the same. After a long conversation, that was bordering on shouting, Arms finally agreed to Aretina's request. After a while, with a series of loud and long dragon roars, the two dragons soared into the sky from the platform, flapping their wings rapidly in a certain direction in the distance. In the blink of an eye, the two giant dragons became two insignificant black dots on the horizon. White Tower, icy wind territory of the north. This was a small platform high up in the middle of the tower. Leaning on the stone railing, the Ice Lady Xue Fu looked at the black forest in the distance. Her eyes flashed. No one knew what she was thinking. This was the frozen plateau, and the weather was especially dry and cold. The biting cold wind blew past the tower, blowing the tiny ice particles gathered by the wizard's pagoda into the air. They looked like beautiful ribbons made of snowflakes. The platform was 60 to 70 meters above the ground, and the temperature was so low that even a drop of water would freeze. But Xue Fu was only wearing a thin muslin dress, but she did not feel the cold at all. Instead, the cold air made her feel comfortable and full of energy. She was born with the ice element and was especially suited to the environment here. Ever since the White Tower was built, standing here and looking into the distance had become her favorite hobby. Unfortunately, as an important person in the White Tower, it was impossible for her to relax even if she wanted to. Soft footsteps came from the wizard's pagoda behind her, and a graceful, beautiful elf maid walked out. She bowed and said, "Lady Xue Fu, Her Excellency Meryl requests your presence." Perhaps it was because the temperature was too low, but the elf girl in a maid's robe couldn't help but shiver slightly. She should not have been afraid of this cold with her abilities as a level 1 fighter. However, after being imprisoned by the sorcerer's evil methods, her former power had left her, leaving only this pale and beautiful shell. Fortunately, the witch who recruited her as a maid was not that perverted. Otherwise, the once beautiful moonlight dancer would have no choice but to commit suicide. But since she had fallen into the hands of the wizards, her fate was no longer in her control. Even death was too extravagant for them. Here, death was not the true end, but the beginning of another form of torture. "Ferlin, are you doing well here?" Xue Fu was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she stretched out her jade-like but bone-chilling right hand, gently caressing Ferlin's face. "Thanks to you, Ferlin is doing well. That's good." A meaningful smile appeared on Xue Fu's face. "Don't try to save your so-called companions. If you break the tower's rules, even I won't be able to save you." Ferlin's body, which had already been frozen stiff, trembled once more. In this evil tower that worshipped wizards, the forest elves were just maids and playthings that served them in their daily lives. If any forest elf dared to resist, they would be punished by the wizards or executed on the spot. Their bodies and souls would then be turned into undead creatures. After Ferlin became Lady Xue Fu's maid, she had already seen her 3 companions being punished by the Magi. They had become cold, undead creatures that only knew how to follow orders. What was even more tragic was that the souls of her 3 companions were still imprisoned in their original bodies. Every day, they lived a painful life like the walking dead. "My lady, as long as you can free my 3 companions, I I am willing to listen to your orders for the rest of my life." She bit her lips so hard that they were pale from the cold. Because she used too much force, there was even a trace of blood slowly flowing down. However, Ferlin did not seem to feel it. He trembled as he knelt in front of Xue Fu and begged her. "You still don't understand." Xue Fu shook her head slowly, her eyes as cold as a sword without a trace of pity. "You are my property. What's the point of using yourself to make a wish? Moreover, those undead creatures are the property of other magi. I can't just take them away." "My lady, don't say any more." Xue Fu rejected him decisively. However, her tone changed slightly. "But I have a wizard experiment to do recently. I still lack a willing experimental subject. If you can recommend me a suitable one, I might be able to buy them for you." "I'm willing. I'm willing." Ferlin's lowered head suddenly lifted up. "My lady, please use me as an experiment. As long as you can free their souls, I'm willing to be your experimental subject. This experiment will be very painful. I'm not afraid." Ferlin's proud face was filled with determination. "All right." Xue Fu could not help but sigh. "Since you're so insistent, I'll give it a try. After the experiment is completed, your 3 companions will definitely be freed." After saying this, Xue Fu walked into the wizard's pagoda expressionlessly. Behind her, Ferlin lifted his head, a tear slowly flowing from the corner of his eyes that were filled with determination. Unfortunately, before the tears could flow down her face was frozen into a sparkling and translucent ball of ice. She gently fell onto the cold, hard floor of the platform and shattered into pieces of ice. 8th level of the White Tower, Wizard Hall. Meryl, who was surrounded by a large group of elf maids and magical machinery puppets, suddenly raised her head and saw Xue Fu entering the room. She could not help but smile. "Lady Xue Fu, you're finally here. I was just about to discuss the relocation of the citizens with you." Chapter 741. Having a territory, but no citizens was like eating meat without salt. Of course, it was bland and tasteless. The barefoot farmers and citizens of the territory could not help the Crimson family at all, and they had to waste a lot of the family's time and effort to help them make a living. However, in the long run, this was an iron gate that had to be crossed. Where did magi come from? They could be recruited or hired, but these magi were always outsiders. It was difficult to nurture them into family magi who were loyal to the Crimson family. Thus, they had to gather suitable craftsmen and commoners, establish a stable ruling order, and select talented acolytes from them. Only with this method could the acolytes born in the family's territory not have to worry about their future. Their lives were tied to the Crimson family's prosperity and disgrace. Only then could they nurture magi who were truly loyal to Grimm. There were millions of magi who came from outside. They came for benefits, and they would naturally leave for them. Once they met a difficulty that required them to risk their lives to overcome, the only ones who could do so were the magi of the family. Thus, even if the price of nurturing the magi of the family was very high, the Crimson family could only build up the family's bloodline one step at a time. Now that the family had their own territory, and there were no enemies eyeing them covetously, it was the best time to recruit soldiers and raise their banner. Thus, after taking control of the White Tower, Meryl could not wait to discuss the issue of the citizens of the territory with Chave. This was actually a very troublesome problem. The Icewind territory was originally a bitterly cold place, and it was adjacent to the Black Forest. There was no Magus Tower to protect it, so even if all the people in the surrounding few hundred miles were gathered together, there would not be more than 100. It would be extremely difficult to build up the prototype of the Icewind territory with just these few people. In the end, the Icewind territory lacked people. They lacked a large number of people. In the past, there were many stories of northern witches who had overcome obstacles and led their citizens to open up a territory in the Black Forest. However, the legendary witches in the stories had never been like the Crimson family, who had built up their power from nothing. They either had the backing of their families or the support of their witches. In short, they had both the manpower and the military force. Even so, It would take more than 100 years of repeated tug-of-war before they could seize a stable territory from the hands of the many powerful magical beasts, enough for the sorcerer family to flourish. And in this process, the number of civilians who died from the harsh environment, plague and disease, savage miasma, ferocious wild beasts, and terrifying monsters were innumerable. Only by relying on the accumulation of human lives and the perseverance of the witches would it be possible to achieve the final success. But now, the Crimson family had the Wizard's Pagoda and the wizards, but they lacked a large number of citizens who could fill the territory with energy. Lady Chaff, I would like to know, in the past, if the Northern Witches wanted to recruit some people, what method would they use? When the only ones left in the hall were the Cheval Witch and Venlier, who was scribbling away, Meryl could not help but ask impatiently. The people are the most precious wealth of every witch faction, and they would not be sold easily. If Lady Meryl really needs a group of people, I can return to some of the Destiny Witches' hereditary territories and forcibly recruit a group of people. But, saying this, Cheval could not help but pause. The environment here is too harsh, and there are no living necessities. Even if we forcibly recruit some people, it would be difficult for them to survive here. We can't possibly let those farmers and merchants live in the Wizard Tower. Hearing Cheval's complaints, even Meryl, the person in charge, could not help but worry. That's right. Even if they recruited people, surviving in this world of ice and snow would be a huge problem. Could they get a group of people and not let them do anything, and instead let the Crimson family support them? Why don't we think of a way to move a group of gnomes from the gnome dimension to temporarily serve as citizens? They have brains and technology and can also help with the maintenance and management of the Wizard's Pagoda. Meryl hesitated. Meryl, I have to remind you of something. If there are too many members of other races in a territory, it will be difficult to recruit those jobless and free citizens. Cheval kindly reminded. Meryl could not help but feel sad. This was something that could be imagined. Once there were too many other races in a territory, it would definitely affect the perception and sense of security of the human citizens. Once they had reservations and stopped moving forward, it would be difficult to increase the number of human citizens in the Icy Wind territory. If they scared away these human citizens, would they have to recruit gnome, ogre, or dwarf apprentices in the future? Then, Lady Cheval, other than these normal citizens, are there any other ways to obtain a large number of human citizens in a short period of time? Cheval could not help but ask. Are you talking about human slaves? Cheval smiled calmly. That's right. I want to know if there's a way to obtain a large number of cheap human slaves in the North. There are very few wars between the witches in the North. Even if there are conflicts, most of them will be resolved by the Witch Council. So, there are no so-called war slaves here. Meryl's expression could not help but darken. However, the scattered Tower Forest region is fertile ground for war. There are constant conflicts between the large and small witches' clans. If you really need them, we could buy a badge from the Central Continent in the name of the Destiny Witches. Oh, there's such a thing. Meryl's eyes immediately brightened. If we buy them, how many will there be? And the price? Once a family war breaks out in the Central Continent, there may be losers. The family members of the losing side would be dismembered and sold to other wizard families. We, the Witches of the North, have representatives there and can get a share of the profits from the slave trade. The estimated number of slaves is around 2,000 to 3,000 per year. We, the Witches of the North, can get 400 to 600, and the price is around 500 magic crystals per 100 people. That's a very reasonable price. We'll take them all. Meryl's eyebrows twitched, her pretty little face revealing a look of ecstasy. Cheval laughed and shook her head. I'm talking about the Witches of the North. They could get 400 to 600 war slaves, but we, the Destiny Witches, can only get 20 to 30. Only 20 to 30. Hearing this, Meryl could not help but feel discouraged again. At this rate, even if the Crimson family worked hard in the Icewind territory for 100 years, they would not be able to support a complete witch's family. If you think it's too few people, then go catch them. The North does not allow wars between witches' families, but there are endless disputes in the scattered tower forest. As long as you found a good reason, even if you destroyed other wizard families, those old fellows from the Elder Council could only look on helplessly. When that happens, the citizens and resources of the other families will all be yours. Meryl rolled her eyes. Although Cheval's words were harsh, they were not unreasonable. If there was no other way, it was not impossible to try this method. After politely ending the pleasant conversation with Chave, Meryl brought Wendler and the report that she had organized to her teacher for guidance. In her residence on the 13th floor of the White Tower, Meryl finally met her teacher, Grimm, who was busy from day to night. These days, Grimm had been busy making his own witch's equipment. Now that the fire dragon hide was in his hands, he had to follow a complicated process of tanning and tanning it. As this was Grimm's first time dealing with such a high-grade magic material, any mistake in the process would seriously affect the smoothness of the fire dragon hide surface. Moreover, the most precious thing about the fire dragon hide was the strange fire elemental energy it contained. Only by drawing out this energy could the high-grade magic material be used to its fullest potential. It had to be known that even in large magi organizations or magi families, a master tanner was as valuable as an alchemist magus. After all, the hide of a powerful magical creature could only be used to its fullest potential after it was perfectly processed by them. Such skills and methods were also a rare type of knowledge. What did you say, citizens? Grimm's mind was still immersed in the pile of magic formulas and experiments. It took him a long time to understand why Meryl wanted to see him. Yes, teacher, our territory is lacking people now. We need to find a way to get a large number of citizens as soon as possible. Yes, in the long run, citizens are a must, Grimm muttered to himself, his youthful face showing the calmness and seriousness of an experienced person. However, the infrastructure of our territory is not complete yet. Even if we get citizens, it will be difficult for them to survive. So, in the short term, it's better to move a batch of goblins from the Goblin Plain to make up the numbers. Meryl gaped in shock. She did not expect her teacher to have such a comprehensive and meticulous thinking, even though he was only a few years older than her. His question was obviously the same as Lord Schweffu's. But, teacher, if there are too many non-human citizens, it will affect our recruitment of human citizens in the future. Meryl voiced her thoughts in distress. That won't happen. Grimm smiled. The first batch of goblins we've recruited are mainly goblin technicians and engineers. Their main task after coming here is to build suitable houses and village models for the future subjects, as well as to build a series of processing factories. Processing factories? Meryl was completely confused, feeling that she could not keep up with her teacher's train of thought. Chapter 742. Wizard Calendar. Year 32856, 12th of May. The first batch of gnome apprentices that were recruited passed through the teleportation portal and appeared in the public teleportation room on the first floor of the White Tower. Little Loke was the youngest among the group of gnomes. He was short and small, about half the height of a human. He had wide feet, dark green rough skin, a strangely twisted nose, and a pair of large soft ears. This was how gnomes usually looked like. Although Locke was slightly more handsome, in the eyes of the mutated people, almost all goblins looked the same. They couldn't tell any difference. Unfortunately, even with the wizard's pagoda's energy field barrier, most of the gnomes were still firmly pressed to the cold floor by the wizard world's vast and obscure will of the dimension the moment they passed through. Many of the weaker gnomes even fainted before they could even make a sound. Faced with such a scene, the person in charge of the teleportation portal seemed to be prepared. Young men and women wearing short apprentice robes walked into the teleportation portal and fed each of the fainted gnomes a mouthful of blue potion. As for those who were still conscious, they did not do anything to them. Locke had always been a physically strong individual since he was a child. Although he felt the heavy pressure that was everywhere and constantly crushing his body and spirit, he successfully withstood it and didn't faint. He saw a young human girl crouching beside him and giving her companion a mouthful of blue potion. The dizzy and confused companion immediately woke up. Locke licked his lips enviously and asked in a low voice, "Can I take a sip too?" Little Loke spoke in the common language of the wizard world. Ever since the gnome dimension was occupied by the wizards, this common language of the other dimension had become a profound language that the upper class of the gnome empire had to master. Little Loke was very honored. Due to his talent and intelligence, he was also chosen to be part of the first batch to go to the wizard world. This was a young female apprentice with a beautiful face. Her slender body was undoubtedly revealed under the thin cloth robe. Her personality was also very gentle and quiet. She did not have any discrimination against these low-level servants from another dimension. You don't have to drink it. The fact that you were able to resist the suppression of the plane's consciousness with your own mind shows that your spiritual talent is very good. Work hard to etch this strange feeling into your heart. It will be crucial to your future development. The female lurling's words were soft and sweet, calming Locke's fearful heart once more. After a full 15 minutes, all the goblin acolytes slowly moved out of the teleportation circle under the instructions of a magus. There were faint sounds of sobbing in the group. 5 of their companions had died because they couldn't withstand the suppression of the plane. This was the result of the Wizard Pagoda's force field defense, which weakened part of the plane suppression. If not for the Wizard's Pagoda, more than half of the gnomes that were teleported here would have died. After all, the sorcerer world was tens of thousands of times stronger than the goblin plane. The high magic environment and plane pressure here were no less than riding a roller coaster for the creatures of the lower planes. Those with weaker bodies would be eliminated immediately. There were a total of 40 gnomes that were teleported here. Excluding the 5 that had died, there were 35 left. Among them were experienced gnome engineers, as well as skilled gnome technicians. However, most of them were young, intelligent, and talented gnomes. As the servants of the sorcerers, they were allowed to live at the bottom level of the wizard's pagoda. There, every 5 gnomes were assigned to a stone room. Other than a simple wooden bed and a common wooden table, there was nothing else. The young female apprentice that Locke had gotten to know, Eek, lived on the second level of the wizard's pagoda. Their treatment was far better than the young gnomes. They had single rooms, and they could even go to more places in the wizard's pagoda than the young gnomes. As the new servants of the sorcerers, the first thing that Locke and the rest of the gnomes did after settling down in the White Tower was to systematically learn the common language of the sorcerer world. They also had a comprehensive understanding of the general situation of the sorcerer world, as well as its minerals, flora, and fauna. To be honest, the difficulty and pain of a large group of gnomes sitting on tall wooden stools that could not touch the ground and learning a new language from their language teacher was unimaginable. Furthermore, among these gnomes, there was no lack of old gnomes with white hair and beards, as well as strong gnome technicians. Such a large group of gnomes of different ages and occupations, using strange accents to recite the common language of the sorcerer world. That comical scene was hilarious. Even though most of the gnomes' learning ability gave the human scholars who came to teach them a headache, the intelligent young gnomes like Locke still won the praise of all the scholars and teachers. Thus, under the personal intervention of the wizards on the top level of the White Tower, 7 gnomes, led by Locke, were selected. They moved to the second level of the wizard's pagoda and began learning exactly like the human apprentices. At this time, only a month and a half had passed since Locke arrived at the White Tower. The second batch of 40 gnomes appeared in the teleportation formation. In the Wizard Hall on the 8th level of the White Tower, Meryl and Xue Fu were looking at the monitoring crystal on the wooden table in front of them. The crystal was showing the scene within the teleportation formation on the first level of the Wizard's Pagoda. As the assistant of the Tower Master, the old Fox Venlier was waiting by the side. Cough, another 6 gnomes have died. Looking at the gnomes in the teleportation formation, Meryl scanned the area with her mental energy and knew the final outcome. It can't be helped. After all, the gnome dimension is not the real Wizard's Pagoda. Without being able to reduce the power of the teleportation formation, it is inevitable that the gnomes whose bodies and minds are not up to standard will die during the teleportation. Fu's cold gaze also scanned the monitoring crystal, then asked in confusion, "What is that teacher of yours up to?" "To let these gnomes learn together with us, witch apprentices. This, if the witch council finds out about this, those conservative old fellows will definitely come and destroy the White Tower." After saying this, Fu revealed a faint smile, as if she was already imagining the furious expressions of the conservative witches. Teachers' intentions are very clear. The gnomes who pass the test and meet the mental energy standards will be nurtured as wizard apprentices for a while. As for those who do not meet the standards, they will all be chased out of the tower and sent to those high-energy food processing plants to work. Hearing the person in charge of the wizard's pagoda recite these strange and absurd words in an obscure tone, the smile in Fu's eyes became even more intense. That strange wizard high up in the sky would always come up with some unimaginable ideas. For example, the magical energy food processing plants this time would target those mortals who did not have any extraordinary powers. More accurately, it was targeted at the middle and low-level human nobles. The White Tower was adjacent to the Black Forest, and the resources of magical beasts there had never been before. In the past, when wizards or apprentices hunted, they only needed to satisfy the White Tower's own food requirements. As for specially processing some magical beast meat for the human nobles, there had never been such a precedent. After all, the sorcerer world was centered around the sorcerer community, and all considerations of benefits were based on the sorcerer community. Now that the sorcerer world had cast aside the sorcerer community and specialized in some high-energy magical beast meat for the human nobles, this had never been attempted before. After all, in the sorcerer world, there was almost no overlap between sorcerers and mortals. Sorcerers were the rulers, and mortals were the ants and lambs under the protection of the sorcerers, while the human nobles were the shepherd dogs that assisted the sorcerers in managing the flock of sheep. To make the noble sorcerers lower their heads and consider some matters for the nobles and mortals, this was something that would never happen. Although some low-grade sorcerers in dire straits would bow to the nobles and become consultants, there were very few of them. These fellows who had lost their dignity as sorcerers were basically excluded from the mainstream magi circle. As for people like Grimm, who was a powerful rank 2 fire magus and the leader of a rising magus family, he did not consider how to build a good relationship with other magi, but instead thought about how to serve the low-grade human nobles. This was indeed out of Chef's expectations. What did the nobles have? It was just some shiny gold coins, oil paintings, vases, and animal fur. Was there any use in trading these rubbish from them? After all, the only currency in the magus community was magic crystals. Thus, Chef only felt that Lord Grimm's thoughts were unimaginable, and even a little ridiculous. However, the Crimson family was his, and the White Tower was also his. He could do whatever he wanted. Thus, the Ice Maiden Fu watched every step of the White Tower's development like a bystander. "Lady Chef, you're recruiting commoners? Don't worry, Magus Merrill. After I sent the news back to the Tower of Destiny, Leader Alice placed great importance on this matter and has already started transferring people from the nearby territories. I estimate that the first batch of people will arrive in 2 months, and there will be 300 of them. When the time comes, you'll have to make some preparations beforehand." Chapter 743. Unknowingly, the once lonely and cold Icewind territory became lively again. Humans and intelligent beings from different regions gathered here and worked hard for a common goal. The sorcerer apprentices of the Crimson family, the sorcerer apprentices of the Destiny Witches, the goblin apprentices selected from the Goblin Plane, and the wandering apprentices who came because of the reputation. To them, the higher-ups of the Crimson family showed rare kindness and allowed them to share the sorcery facilities of the White Tower fairly. The spacious and comfortable living environment, the peaceful and friendly learning atmosphere, the powerful sorcerer tutors, the comprehensive and systematic library, and the well-equipped witchcraft laboratory. All of these became the most attractive magnets firmly drawing the hearts of the apprentices here and becoming the Crimson family's most loyal supporters. After a few months of trial learning, the apprentices quickly divided into different groups. According to their talent, potential, and speed of improvement, small circles with powerful apprentices as the core quietly appeared. And the core members of these circles were undoubtedly prospective sorcerer apprentices. Within any family, these prospective sorcerer apprentices belonged to an extremely special group. Although they were still sorcerer apprentices in essence, they had begun to enjoy the treatment of new sorcerers in many aspects. They were even responsible for teaching some of the basic subjects of sorcerer apprentices. This also established a high and glorious image in the hearts of most apprentices, and they became the idols and pioneers of many apprentices. Little Locke, as an outsider, successfully joined her small group under the introduction of the female apprentice, Eichel. It was a learning promotion group built around the prospective sorcerer Ponter. Ponter, human, 37 years old, prospective sorcerer, had an affinity with dark elements, and was born in a small human country in the Vicus region of Tallinn. According to the customs of human countries, he seemed to have the identity of a prince, but he was only sent to the wizard tower because he was found to have the talent to become a sorcerer since he was young. He was also one of the first batch of freelance apprentices who chose to join the Crimson family after it was established. His strength was only considered average among the 6 prospective sorcerers in the White Tower. However, with the ability to summon a powerful shadow assassin, he was the type that other prospective sorcerers were least willing to provoke. Before becoming an official sorcerer, prospective sorcerers often lacked powerful defensive spells. Therefore, when faced with a shadow assassin that came and went without a trace, no one wanted to taste its sinister and sharp shadow dagger. Locke was only a junior lurling, so he wasn't qualified to join the organization. However, Eichel's recommendation and his identity as a goblin mechanic had piqued Ponter's interest, and he'd been recruited. After 2 months of study, apart from mastering basic meditation, he had also accidentally awakened his goblin mechanic talent. This allowed him to possess a strange ability similar to the power of his bloodline, allowing him to unleash the full potential of the precision magic machinery. It was a pity that he came to the sorcerer world empty-handed. He did not have a powerful metal magic machine that he could control. Moreover, with the many mechanical and magical components in the metal machinery, it was impossible for his weak mental power to support such a large number of delicate operations. Therefore, he had no choice but to learn more about modifying magic machinery at his own expense and use the cheapest metal to build an eyeball fighter. Although it was called an eyeball mech, it was actually just a simple and crude metal sphere. It was only the size of a human head, and it relied on the high-pressure air ejected from the tiny holes all over its body to propel itself in the air. In order to minimize its weight, the interior of the metal sphere was completely hollowed out and a series of wind elemental spell formations were engraved on it. The most direct consequence of this was that the physical defense of the metal sphere was sharply reduced, but in exchange, it was more agile in flight. The only way this eyeball mech could attack was with a ruby fragment embedded in the metal groove. Using the elemental energy absorbed by the energy-gathering spell formation, the eyeball mech could emit a scorching ray with an energy intensity of up to 11 degrees through the ruby fragment. Since the ruby fragment's fire element was not pure enough, this was already the highest attack strength that Locke could achieve after desperately improving it. If he wanted to increase the attack power of the scorching ray, he would have to replace the ruby fragment with a cracked ruby of a higher grade. However, a ruby fragment cost only 3 magic crystals, while a cracked ruby cost as much as 20 magic crystals. The huge price difference left him with no choice but to choose the cheapest and easiest materials to get his hands on. With the strength of the ruby fragment's magic, it could only maintain an attack frequency of 1 shot every 5 seconds. Once it exceeded this frequency, there was a high chance that it would burn the spell formation and the precious ruby fragment inside the eyeball mech. But even so, he quickly became one of the strongest lurlings among the beginner lurlings because he didn't have to control too many auxiliary magus machineries on his own. After all, with the strength of a beginner apprentice, being able to unleash an apprentice-level spell with an attack power of up to 15 degrees within 5 to 7 seconds was already considered very good. If other beginner apprentices wanted to fight Locke, they would have to constantly be on guard against a metal monster that could fly around in the sky and shoot red rays from time to time. There were not many newcomers who could defeat Locke in a 2-on-1 battle. In order to train the sorcerer apprentices' combat abilities, the White Tower would organize a few sorcerer apprentices to go within 100 miles of the Black Forest almost every week to hunt some apprentice-level beasts or monsters. Of course, the White Tower would send an official wizard to lead the team every time. After leading the team to a suitable area, they would split up. It had to be said that the management of the Crimson family's White Tower was very comprehensive when it came to the trial apprentices. If the apprentice team encountered danger in the forest, they could ask for help from the nearby wizard leading the team. However, this way, the team's harvest would all belong to the wizard leading the team. Therefore, the apprentices prefer to gather around a prospective sorcerer apprentice so that they could get some extra protection in times of danger. After all, with the strength of a prospective apprentice, it was still possible to cast a grade 1 spell. This was especially important in the border area of the Black Forest. Although a quasi-sorcerer who had grasped a rank 1 spell might not be invincible, most areas would be safe for him. This was also the best way for them to show their value. As for the spoils of the apprentices in the Black Forest, they would all belong to themselves or their small team. When they returned to the White Tower, they could sell the spoils to the trading company under their family name or auction it off. This way, the gold coins and magic crystals earned would be enough for them to continue living in the White Tower. The trading company or auction house under the White Tower would divide the prey into different grades. The apprentice-level beasts and magic creatures would be sent to the processing factory, where the hired goblins would process them into tightly sealed metal cans, which would then be packed into boxes and shipped to the central continent. There, the goblin cabbie would set up a happy gold coin trading company and be responsible for selling them to every manor and city of the human nobles. Of course, the human nobles would not be interested in the flesh of normal beasts, but the flesh and fur of low-level magic creatures were still very popular. After all, everyone knew that these magic creatures contained some elemental energy in their bodies. If they could continuously consume these elements in their daily diet, it could obviously increase the basic quality of the human body and the compatibility of energy. Speaking of which, this small change might not mean much to the Magi, but to the human nobles who only wanted to live a few more years, it had a huge and profound meaning. If these nobles could consume the flesh of magic creatures over the years, strengthening their physique was secondary. More importantly, it could increase the chances of their descendants possessing the talent to become Magi. This was what they valued the most. Of course, this small change in probability was only a small change to the 3rd or 4th digit. However, with the goblin cabbie's terrifying mouth that could bring the dead back to life, it was exaggerated into the flesh of divine beasts that could change the fate of their families. After a strong sales campaign, the goblin cabbie had successfully set off a new trend in the central continent of the scattered tower forest, where people adhered to a healthy diet and used the flesh of magic creatures to improve their physiques. This trend was something that other families could not replace. Every Magus family had their own hunting team that constantly hunted magic creatures and searched for rare magic plants to supply to Magi. They naturally had the advantage of competing with the goblin cabbie. However, the numbers they hunted were too few and were unable to satisfy the appetite of the large number of human nobles. Secondly, it was extremely difficult to preserve the flesh of magic creatures, and many rare materials were needed. If it was to be provided to Magi, the Magi who spent money like water would naturally not be stingy with the price. This would allow the hunting team to earn a lot of money. However, if it was to be provided at the same price to the middle and lower class of human nobles, even if they were rich, they would not be able to enjoy such an extravagant feast. The goblin engineers under the White Tower had specially created a metal-sealed lunchbox, which solved this problem perfectly and cheaply. This also made it possible to sell the flesh of high-energy magic creatures at a low price. Chapter 744. 13th Level of the White Tower. As a high and mighty level 2 wizard, the lowly affairs at the bottom of the wizard's pagoda could no longer affect Grimm's daily life and studies. Grimm had completely become a hands-off shopkeeper, delegating the daily management and maintenance of the 2 wizards' pagodas to him. Of course, Grimm told the public that this was to nurture the experience and training of his family's wizards. But in reality, this was just a way for him to shirk his responsibilities. To be honest, when a level 2 wizard looked back at the daily life at the bottom of the wizard's pagoda, he felt like a cold chess player silently looking down at the chessboard in his hands. The future of the Crimson Clan, the hard work of the family's wizards, as well as the countless students and citizens gathered like ants, were no longer living creatures in Grimm's eyes. Instead, they were just insignificant dots. It was just that some of the dots were smaller, while others were larger. At that moment, 1 or 2 dots could no longer attract his attention. Only when those small dots converged and collided with each other on the chessboard would he be able to focus a little bit of his attention. Furthermore, there was a certain degree of randomness and chance in his bets, and it was not that urgent or timely. He was like a lazy farmer looking at the sky for a harvest. He was only in charge of planting the seeds at the right time, and then investigating the next time he remembered to do so. The length of time he had to investigate was also related to the duration of his experiments. If the seeds failed, he could just plant them again. If he succeeded, he would happily harvest the part he needed. As for the rest, it would naturally become the reward for the hard work of the wizards at the bottom. Hence, many of the things that Meryl tried her best to do were just random experiments and ideas in Grimm's eyes. This was how beings of different dimensions looked at things from different perspectives. To Grimm, as the leader of the Crimson family, he naturally had the responsibility to make the newly established territory of his family prosperous and prosperous. However, Grimm only had to pass down his intentions to his subordinates, and there would naturally be wizards like Meryl who would carry them out. In this process, Grimm didn't even need to do anything himself. He only needed to pay attention to and push things forward when the time was right. That was why the training in the Black Forest was nothing but an insignificant part of the actual combat training for the family apprentices in Grimm's eyes. Even if a large number of apprentices accidentally died in the Black Forest, it would only delay the rise of the family for 5 to 6 years. For Locke and the others, an accident might mean the end of their lives. However, to a Tier 2 sorcerer with an upper lifespan of 400 years, it was nothing more than a lengthy witchcraft experiment. Even if he failed, all he needed to do was to wipe out these failures and replace them with a new batch of experimental subjects. Then, he would continue the family's development process of constant exploration and trial and error. While trying and correcting his family strategy, Grimm spent most of his energy on the experiments at hand. What he paid the most attention to was undoubtedly the creation of the 2 pieces of the blazing flame monarch. For this, he even hired a sewing master from the Northern Witches at a high price. Using the skin, tendons, and fire marrow crystals of the fire dragon as the basic materials, he sewed a pair of fire dragon boots of the perfect size and style for himself. Grimm then personally completed the final step, using a special method to draw out the flame spell formation that had been engraved into the fire dragon boots. With a bright yellow flame burning on the pair of boots, all the impurities on the boots were incinerated, leaving behind only the purest and most basic material. Subsequently, the Mageweth and rune lines engraved inside the boots were faintly visible, forming a series of mysterious patterns on the surface of the boots. At this point, Grimm had spent hundreds of thousands of magic crystals and 3 months to create the first piece of the Blazing Flame Monarch set, the Ash Boots. As Grimm's first Grade 2 equipment, the Ash Boots not only gave him higher magic resistance, but also allowed him to cast the Path of Burning without wasting his spiritual force. This way, wherever Grimm passed through, a 1-meter-tall, 2-meter-wide path of burning would form behind him. Any creature that stepped into the path of burning would suffer 60 degrees of fire damage every second, and the path of burning would last for 3 minutes. This meant that Grimm could easily set up an environment that was most beneficial to him on the battlefield. In addition, Grimm's recovery rate would increase by several folds within the flames, which would undoubtedly be advantageous for him in a prolonged battle. As an unexpected surprise, the ash boots also gave Grimm a 1-point increase in spiritual force. Even Chip did not predict this beforehand. Grimm guessed that it should be related to the materials of the fire dragon that were used to create the ash boots. Thanks to the mighty rank 2 fire dragon bamboo, not only had it contributed the best piece of fire dragon skin, it had also contributed a 3-meter-long fire dragon tendon and a fire marrow crystal formed from the fire dragon's spinal cord. Of course, the remaining items were not wasted. They were all devoured by the dragon-devouring maiden Ollie, becoming nourishment for her growth. It was a pity that Ollie did not allow Grimm to use the AI chip to scan her body and soul, so Grimm could only estimate her improvement from her external appearance. Ollie, high grade 2, female. Race, unknown. Occupation, dragon devourer. Stats, strength greater than 10. Vitality, greater than 12. Agility, greater than 21. Spirit, greater than 20. Bloodline ability, reverse draconic aura. The bane of dragons. When Ollie faced a dragon, her magic resistance would be doubled, and most attacks would be able to ignore the magic and physical defenses of the dragon. This special profession ability was simply too awesome for slaying dragons. Grimm could not help but think of stealing a portion of the Dragon Devourer's bloodline ability. However, after understanding the weaknesses of the Dragon Devourer, Grimm dispelled this senseless idea. Firstly, the Dragon Devourer's strength only targeted the dragon race. Against other races, most of the Dragon Devourer's abilities would be useless, and it would immediately become a weakling. Secondly, the Dragon Devourer was the common enemy of the powerful dragon race. Even though the relationship between the lightning dragon arms and Grimm was very close, the moment it discovered that Grimm had a Dragon Devourer hidden under him, it would probably turn against Grimm at any moment. There was no helping it. The Dragon Devourer's bloodline was too terrifying. It was practically a slaughterer that was born to deal with the mighty dragon race. If any Dragon Devourer was allowed to grow stronger, it would pose a huge threat to the entire Lance Plain and even the dragon race. Once Grimm stole a portion of the Dragon Devourer's bloodline, his relationship with the entire dragon race would be locked in a state of blood feud. At that time, wherever he went, all the dragons would be eager to destroy him. The mighty dragon race was a race that could stand shoulder to shoulder with powerful magi in the universe. If he was targeted by them, would he have a good ending? Because of this, Grimm could only look on helplessly and let the source-stealing bug in his hand continue to remain dormant. After more than 10 years of research and nurturing, Grimm had already nurtured 3 generations of this strange bug with the innate ability to plunder. Based on his experiments on the bloodline, Grimm discovered that most life forms could only withstand 15% of the power of their bloodline. If the Magi were to be measured according to their biological ranks, this meant that the degree of bloodline change could not exceed 2 ranks. In other words, a beginner rank 2 Magus could at most plunder a portion of the innate ability of a high rank 2 life form. Once this range was exceeded, the target would not be able to withstand the power of the bloodline, and their body would collapse and their genetic strands would break. This kind of injury would directly affect the target's soul, and there was no way to save it. At this moment, Grimm finally understood why dragons had such strong physiques. If they didn't have such a strong physique, perhaps even their own bodies wouldn't be able to withstand such a powerful bloodline power. Grimm had been nurturing source-stealing bugs for 3 to 4 years. Apart from occasionally using them to transfer their innate abilities during bloodline experiments to accumulate the necessary data, the rest were still being nurtured at the highest level of the Crimson Throne. The reason Grimm did not dare to use it on himself was that it was easy to change a bloodline's innate ability, but once he realized that it had gone down the wrong path, it would be extremely difficult to turn back. Although his innate ability was not the best, his Balrog body that specialized in fire allowed him to have terrifying dominance and destructive power on the battlefield. If he accidentally polluted his bloodline and didn't get the desired result, Grim wouldn't be able to cry even if he wanted to. Of course, apart from himself, Grim could also use this source stealing bug on his subordinates to build a foundation and accumulate more experience in transferring bloodline innate abilities. However, after searching with his fingers, Grim could not find the most suitable subordinate. Those with suitable strength had questionable loyalty, while those with good loyalty had heavy responsibilities and could not leave to cooperate with his bloodline experiments. Those with weak strength did not deserve to waste a source stealing bug on them, which was difficult to nurture. The current Crimson family was like a carrot in a hole. Almost every magus in the family had a difficult task on their shoulders. If one or two core magi of the family fell because of his bloodline experiments, the Crimson family's operations would immediately come to a halt, and there might even be a terrifying decline. Chapter 745. The Ash Boots had been completed, and the next item was the Flame Emblem Armband. The Fire Dragon's blood and top-grade fire agate had been prepared, but he still lacked half of the essence fire iron. High-grade resources like these were rare to begin with, and Grim did not know many high-ranked alchemists. Hence, it was difficult to gather enough in a short time. Just when Grim thought that he could only delay this matter for another 3 to 5 years, Alice sent him an exciting piece of news. The whereabouts of the essence fire iron had been determined. Grim rushed to the Tower of Destiny as fast as he could. There, Alice was waiting for him with her brows furrowed. Is there something wrong with the news? There's nothing wrong with the news. I can confirm that they have a large amount of essence fire iron, enough for you to forge a magic weapon. Then why are you still hesitating? The problem is that I wasn't the one who found them. They found me. Grim's expression immediately turned solemn. If Alice had divined this news herself, Grim would not have been worried. However, since the other party had taken the initiative to look for him, it meant two things. Firstly, the other party had definitely come prepared. It was obvious that they knew what Grim needed the most. Secondly, the other party's target was Grim, and they did not seem to have concealed this fact. Where is she? In the hall on the 5th floor. A few minutes later, Grim finally met the mysterious northern magus in a magic hall. This was a middle-aged witch with an extremely ordinary face. She was not very old, but there was a sinister aura lingering in her eyes. Looking at her would always make one's heart palpitate. Beep. Detected a high-energy force field. Unable to see through it. Unable to scan. The AI chip's prompt stunned Grim. It was not like he had never encountered high-ranked magi before. Even a rank 3 dark magus could not hide her aura to such an extent. Coupled with the palpitations he felt when he approached her, Grim's heart trembled. He suspected that she might be a rank 4 magus. A rank 4 magus. Even in the northern lands, where there were many talented people, such a powerful magus would only appear once in 100 years. Grim could not help but feel slightly nervous that the other party would come looking for him. Are you Grim? As if sensing Grim's nervousness, the middle-aged witch asked calmly. Yes, Tier 2 Fire Wizard. Grim hesitated for a moment before replying. I have a mission here that I need someone to help me with. The reward for the mission is 30 kilograms of fire-repellent iron. Are you willing to accept it? The middle-aged witch directly stated her intention. Mission? Grim licked his lips. 30 kilograms of fire's rag, iron, was more than enough for him to forge a flame emblem. What can I do for you, sir? Molten core. I need at least a grade 2 molten core. Grim swallowed his saliva, and his youthful and tough face immediately revealed a strange expression of I knew it. The molten core could only be found in high-level flame creatures. It was like their heart, the core component of the flame creature's condensed flame essence. In the Magus world, it was rare to find a Lord-ranked flame creature, so if one wanted to obtain a molten core, they would have to go to another world to look for it. A Grade 2 molten core meant that one would need to kill a Grade 2 Lord of the Flames. Just thinking about it made one's scalp go numb. You don't need to worry about where to find it. I have the coordinates of a Grade 2 Lord of the Flames. Go kill it and bring me its molten core. The middle-aged witch said coldly. She raised her hand and threw out a fiery red ball of light that was emitting a faint glow. Grim raised his hand and used a layer of flame barrier to stop the ball of light in front of him. Beep. Strange spiritual force detected. Detected a world waymark from another plane. Initial analysis shows that it is a world waymark from the fire elemental plane. Requesting host's instruction to accept it? Grim hesitated for a moment and finally released the control of his spiritual force. The fiery red ball of light instantly entered Grim's brain. Grim closed his eyes and lowered his eyelids to hide the flickering blue light in the depths of his pupils. Soon, he extracted the world waymark hidden in the spiritual force signal. At the same time, a strange scene that had been imprinted with spiritual force appeared in Grim's mind. It was a strange world made entirely of flames. The sky was burning, and so was the earth. Even the basic substances that formed the outlines of mountains, rivers, rocks, grasslands, and other objects were slowly burning. In this world of flames, a tall humanoid figure made up of flames stood silently at the center of the image. It was about 10 meters tall, and its entire body was made up of strange golden flames. Its hands, legs, waist, and neck were adorned with exquisite magic collars that were rich in magical energy. It was precisely because of the restraints of these magical collars that the strange golden flames only flowed slowly within its translucent body of flames and did not disperse into the outside world in the slightest. Through the tall and mighty body of flames, one could vaguely see the heart of the dark red flame in its chest, the molten core. The Chip continued to work. From this spiritual force imprint, apart from analyzing an unknown world waymark in the fire elemental plane, he could also extract a trace of the aura of the tall Lord of the Flames. With this aura, Grim would no longer have to worry about mistaking the Lord of the Flames for someone else. Grade 2. It was indeed a Grade 2 Lord of the Flames. You mean? Grim carefully measured his tone. You want me to go to the fire elemental plane and kill the Lord of the Flames there, then bring back its molten core? Grim could only use the word kill to describe this mission. There was no helping it. The 4 great elemental planes were a strange world with many sides. Of course, the fire elemental plane was filled with pure fire elemental creatures, and they all lived in groups. A Grade 2 Lord of the Flames in the fire elemental plane would at least occupy a large territory that spanned hundreds of miles, and its army of fire elemental creatures would not be less than 100,000. If Grim were to go there alone, he might not even be able to defeat the Lord of the Flames in a one-on-one fight. Perhaps the Lord of the Flames army would be able to annihilate him without leaving a trace. That was why Grim purposely used the word kill. Otherwise, he could not think of any other way to kill a Grade 2 Lord of the Flames that possessed such strength and a large army. At this moment, Grim vaguely understood the other party's intentions. The other party did not want the molten core. Their real goal was to kill the Grade 2 Lord of the Flames. Although the other party's strength was much higher than hers, she was still helpless against the Lord of the Flames that hid in the fire elemental plane. The characteristics of the fire elemental plane meant that any outsider could visit it at will, but it was difficult for them to survive there. There was no air, no water, no food, no roads. The only thing, there was a strange flame that burned continuously. Creatures that did not belong to the fire elemental plane could only maintain a magic barrier to resist the invasion of the entire world. Moreover, there were only fire elements there. Even if other elemental magi could survive there, they would not be able to get any nourishment from the outside world. Therefore, there was a reason why the other party wanted to find a fire shaman. At least the fire shaman would not be beaten up without being able to fight back, nor would he have all his power depleted. As for whether or not he could defeat the Lord of the Flames, that was Grimm's problem. You agree? The middle-aged magus asked coldly. Grimm hesitated for a moment. Before he could turn around to look at Alice, her telepathic voice sounded in his mind. Agree to her request. I promise there are no traps in there. Grimm's heart finally calmed down, and he nodded in agreement. Alice, who was listening from a corner of the hall, frowned slightly, her face revealing a trace of confusion. As if worried that Grimm would go back on his words, the middle-aged magus took out a contract from her bosom and tossed it to him. You can take a look at the contract. If you agree, then sign it. Glancing at it, Grimm had already understood the contents of the witchcraft contract on the sheepskin scroll. What was written on it was exactly what the other party had promised. There were no falsehoods or traps. Grimm pondered for a moment, then slowly said, If you trust me, why don't you give me the fire-repelling iron first? That way, I'll be more confident in completing this mission. That's not a problem. As if she was not worried that Grimm would go back on his word, the middle-aged magus tossed a wooden earring to him. It contained the 15 kilograms of fire-repelling iron that Grimm urgently needed. Since the other party was so straightforward, Grimm naturally would not waste any more time. He condensed a strand of spiritual force at the tip of his finger and gently pressed it on the inscription at the bottom of the contract. A flame mark slowly appeared on the surface, and the bright yellow halo that represented the establishment of the contract instantly entered Grimm and the middle-aged magus's bodies. This kind of contract had a very strong binding force on magi. If a magus dared to violate the contract, they would suffer from the backlash of the contract, and their soul would no longer be able to progress. If this contract was made by a grade 4 magus, the spell's effect would probably be as long as 100 to 200 years. This meant that as long as Grimm could not complete the contract, his strength would not improve. Chapter 746. Why did you agree to it? Don't you think there's something strange about this? As soon as the middle-aged witch left, Alice couldn't wait to rush up to Grimm and interrogate him. Grimm was stunned. Didn't you ask me to agree? What did I ask you to agree? I've been trying to persuade you not to sign this contract. You said you were confident. The two of them were arguing, but suddenly they quieted down. I might know which faction this which belongs to, Alice said, gnashing her teeth in hatred. Deceiving witch. Grimm's mind worked quickly. All the strange abilities of the major witch factions flashed through his mind, and he quickly found the crux of the problem. Only they have the ability to deceive us and trick us into taking the bait. Looks like that fellow just now had disguised both our spiritual frequencies at the same time and fooled both of us. Even spiritual frequencies could be disguised. For the first time, Grimm felt terrified of these deceiving witches. After all, a person's spiritual waves and frequency were like their spiritual identity card. They were unique and difficult to fake. Most of the time, eyes and ears could deceive a person, but spiritual waves and frequency could not be deceived. This was something that the Magi had already acknowledged. Therefore, Magi relied on their unique spiritual waves to distinguish each other, and not their easily deceived eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. But now, even these were not as reliable as before. That damned witch had communicated with Grimm and Alice with a fake psychic wave in front of them. In the end, she had tricked Grimm into signing that damned witchcraft contract. Since this witch was in disguise, there was no guarantee that the damned contract was not fake. Grimm's young and handsome face was full of worry. Then, this contract, Alice's brows sank. Helen, hurry up and prepare the astrological ritual. I need it immediately. The magic sprite that had been obediently perched on her shoulder immediately agreed and flew out. Half a day later, the result of Alice's divination came out. As expected, there was a serious problem with the contract. Firstly, the level 2 Lord of the Flames did exist. There was no doubt about this. Otherwise, the witchcraft contract would not have been formed. Secondly, the world waymark of the fire elemental plane pointed to the location of the Flame Lord. There was no doubt about that. However, What the middle-aged witch didn't tell Grimm was that this Tier 2 flame lord wasn't an ordinary little lord. She was a newly promoted flame lord that the flame monarch, Grom, valued. The flame monarch, Grom, might not be considered a powerful figure in the fire elemental world, but in the plane world, he was a powerful figure whose creature level was as high as level 5. Of course, apart from its own shocking strength, it also had a 3 million fire elemental army under it. And this was the reason why the flame monarch Groms was so confident. Of course, most of the fire elementals in the 3 million fire elementals were still the ones that had yet to advance. However, one should not underestimate these low-grade fire elementals that even beginner acolytes could easily deal with. Once someone gathered them together, they would become a terrifying force that could kill any man or god. Meanwhile, the deception which had coaxed Grimm to snipe the Flame Monarch Groom's most capable subordinate, a Tier 2 Lord of the Flames. This time, Grimm had a headache. Kill. The opponent's strength and influence were too great, and it would be easy for him to attract powerful enemies. If he didn't kill, the witchcraft contract had already been signed. If this dragged on, he would be stuck at mid-level 2, unable to advance any further. Although Grimm was very confident in the Crimson family, if the family leader's strength stagnated for a long time, his control over the family would be greatly weakened. After all, most magi respected strength. Although they also valued knowledge, if knowledge could not be converted into strength, then it was better to not have it. Why? Grimm asked in a low voice. He found it hard to understand. If the opponent really wanted to harm him, a single Tier 4, which could easily wipe the entire Crimson family off the map. However, the opponent had used such a clumsy and troublesome method to lock up Grimm's strength for 200 years. Alice thought for a moment, then said to Grimm with a sorrowful expression, "I'm sorry. I might have dragged you down this time." Grimm was surprised. "Why do you say that? We might have been too close recently." Alice sighed and explained, "The Northern Witches have always been a system of their own, and they hate the interference of external forces. After all, I'm the leader of the Destiny Witches. Although the Destiny Witches have not recovered their strength, they still don't want me to be too close to an outsider. That's why they came up with such a gentle method, so that you won't turn against them, and at the same time, they can attack an outsider like me." What a scheme. Grimm quickly sorted out his thoughts and understood the story behind Alice's words. The only thing he didn't know now was who in the Northern Witches faction was involved in this conspiracy. Of course, the leaders of the witches would not stoop so low as to scheme against a Tier 2 wizard. But as long as they revealed their intention to teach Alice a lesson, there would naturally be a large number of subordinates to arrange and plan for them. So in the end, Grimm was still tricked by these Northern Witches. The opponent was able to conceal my fate perception beforehand. My initial guess is that a false witch was involved. Today, the one who lured you into signing the contract was a deceit witch. Don't be fooled by her outward appearance. I've already verified that the one who left the origin aura on the contract was a Tier 2 witch. She lied to us so miserably. The one just now was a Tier 2 deceit witch. Grimm's eyes widened, and after a long time, he slowly let out a sigh. Damn, these deceit witches were too good at deceiving. She was actually able to disguise herself as a Tier 4 witch without anyone noticing. Even thinking about it now, Grimm still felt that it was inconceivable. It seemed that setting up a family structure in the territory of the Destiny Witches had still violated the Northern Witches' taboo. Previously, when the Farron Plane had helped Alice without hesitation, the Northern Witches had turned a blind eye to it and treated Grimm as a wizard under Alice's control. But now, Grimm's Crimson family had swaggered into the territory of the Northern Witches, putting up a tiger's skin. This clearly dissatisfied many of the witch bosses, and they began to feel that the wizards from the outside world were slowly infiltrating the witches' territory. That was why these big shots had inexplicably made this move against Grimm, giving him a venomous look. Grimm knew that he had suffered a loss, but he could only grit his teeth and silently swallow this bitter pill. Everyone knew how important 1 or 200 years was to a Tier 2 wizard. Even with Grim Joie's talent and terrifying advancement speed, he would be half crippled after being locked up for 1 or 200 years. I'm sorry. Alice's eyes reddened and tears streamed down her cheeks. At the end of the day, Grim had been the victim of Alice's undeserved misfortune. Therefore, it was no wonder that Alice was so sad and resentful. Don't give up so quickly. Grim quickly regained his composure after his anger subsided. Tell me first, is there any other way to break out of this situation? Alice looked at Grim in surprise. When she saw the resolute and calm light in his black eyes, she realized that he had not been knocked down by this accident and was still calmly thinking about how to break out of this situation and counterattack. This was probably the quality that a person who could do great things had to have. Inwardly impressed by Grim's calmness, Alice wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes and began to calm down as she began to make plans for Grim. A while later, I've combed through the entire situation again, and there are only 3 paths in front of us. First, don't do anything. Just wait until the contract expires, and that's it. I've divined that this witchcraft contract can suppress you for 139 years. As long as the contract expires, given your talent, you still have a 90% chance of advancing to grade 3 before your vitality runs out. Grim shook his head slightly, and Alice could only continue her analysis. The second path is to find a way to force the deception which to voluntarily give up on this witchcraft contract. Grim closed his eyes and thought deeply for a long time, but in the end, he shook his head with difficulty. Since the other party had come prepared, they would naturally be on guard against this method. Kidnapping a grade 2 deception, which in the territory of the Northern Witches was almost impossible, even with Alice's full cooperation. Thus, Grim could only grit his teeth and give up. Then there's only the last one left. Find a way to kill that grade 2 Lord of the Flames. As long as it's dead, the witchcraft contract will be mostly complete, and the remaining power won't be enough to restrict your strength. Alice decisively took out the last path. This path seemed the simplest, but it was actually the most dangerous of the 3. Since the other party did not want Grim to complete the source contract, there was no guarantee that they would not do something to the Flame Lord. In this way, when Grim calculated the strength of the Flame Lord, he could no longer treat it as a pure grade 2 Lord of the Flames. Perhaps if Grim followed the coordinates given to him, what awaited him would be the endless army of the Flame Lord's terrifying fire elemental army. However, a Flame Lord was just a Flame Lord. At best, it was just a slightly stronger fire elemental creature. How high could its intelligence be? Chapter 747. This unexpected incident had undoubtedly disrupted Grim's training plan. His top priority now was not to improve his strength, but to craft the Flame Emblem armband as soon as possible. After all, only by fusing the 2 pieces of the Flame Emblem could Grim be truly immune to fire, unlike before, when he had to transform into a body of fire. If he was forced to enter the fire elemental plane, none of his companions would be able to accompany him. The fire elemental plane was a world of fire elemental creatures. Even if grade 2 wizards like Mary and Alice had high magic resistance, they would not be able to endure the burning of fire day and night. Let alone them, even the thick-skinned dragonoid Zacha could not do that. Therefore, if he really needed to enter the fire elemental plane, Grim could only rely on himself. If his companions could not survive in the fire elemental plane, then what about other methods? The fire elemental plane was a completely pure elemental plane that rejected all other elements except fire. As such, the wizard tools and wizard accessories that needed to absorb element from the outside world would become single-use items that could not be replenished after use. Magic scrolls, magic potions, magic wands, accessories. None of these could help Grim. What about magic puppets? Since his debut, these elemental magic puppets had been the greatest help to Grim. Could he still rely on them to get through this difficult time? As Grim read the detailed information about the fire elemental plane, his expectations grew lower and lower. The fire elemental plane rejected all other elements except fire, which meant that wind dragons, destroyers, and rotting ones would quickly consume the stored elemental energy in the fire elemental plane. The only ones that could be used were probably fire elemental magic puppets. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. At the very least, the terrifying Balrog could survive for a long time by relying on the abundant fire elements in the fire elemental plane. With the terrifying Balrog and Grimm himself as a powerful fire wizard, surviving in the fire elemental plane would not be a problem. The only problem now was that he did not know what kind of traps those hateful witches had set up around the Flame Lord. If he were to be caught by the enemy due to his impulsiveness, he would really be at his wit's end in the fire elemental plane, where he had no one to rely on. After all, what happened to him involved some secrets of the Northern Witches, so Grimm did not reveal the news to anyone around him. Although he trusted Mary, she was impulsive and easily angered. After knowing the news, Grimm was worried that she would secretly go after those deceiving witches. Hence, after handing over the daily management of the White Tower to Meryl, Grimm used the excuse of conducting a large-scale spell experiment to return to the Blazing Flame Monarch. The Blazing Flame Monarch had also constructed a fire elemental altar here, which could open up a path to the fire elemental plane at any time. Therefore, Grimm felt that it was necessary for him to explore the fire elemental plane first. The creation of the Flame Emblem Armband would take another 3 to 4 months. During this time, it would be better for him to familiarize himself with the fire elemental plane. After returning to the Flame Monarch from the White Tower, Grimm first summoned Gargamel and asked him about the Wizard Pagoda's recent situation. He then gave him some tasks before waving his hand and dismissing him. After Gargamel left, Grimm used his authority as a tower master to move the fire elemental altar on the first level of the Wizard's Pagoda into his residence. It was a giant fire elemental altar with 3 levels, 20 meters long and 30 meters wide. Each level was 3 meters tall. The entire white surface of the tower was covered in strange magical lines and wizard runes. There are also many different types of fire elemental creatures. At the 4 corners of each level, there was an elemental brazier with bright yellow elemental flames floating above it. At the top of the altar was a thick and wide altar. It was where spellcasters offered sacrifices to the fire elemental plane. Most fire elemental altars had 2 functions. One was to summon powerful fire elemental creatures from the fire elemental plane, and the other was to use the flame gate that Grimm had to use. Only through the flame gate could Grimm smoothly travel between the wizard world and the fire elemental plane. After the fire elemental altar was in place, Grimm used his authority to direct a special energy channel from the energy room to the fire elemental altar. This way, he would not have to worry about the flame gate collapsing due to a lack of energy. After doing all this, Grimm carefully inspected the fire elemental altar. After making sure that there were no problems, he waved his hand and activated the fire elemental altar. As the abundant fire elemental energy continuously flowed into the fire elemental altar, the fire elemental altar began to light up from the base of the tower. Wherever the fire elemental energy passed through, the runes and magical formations on the altar began to slowly revolve and ignite a thick, steaming flame. On top of the altar, Grimm hesitated for a moment before taking out the destructive flame's wizard staff that had been with him for a long time from his storage ring. This destructive flame's wizard staff was a powerful staff given to him by Alice after she successfully leveled up. But now that Grimm's power had increased, this level 1 wizard staff was no longer suitable for him. Now it was time for it to display its abilities once again. Grimm raised his hand and gently inserted the destructive flame's wizard staff into the narrow slot in the middle of the altar. As the surging fire elemental energy flowed into the wizard staff through the altar, the destructive flame's wizard staff began to turn a fiery red. Then it turned crimson white and became brighter and brighter. In the end, the light emitted from it was so bright that one could not look at it directly. These rays of light floated above the altar and gradually gathered together, condensing into the shape of an illusory light door. Through the flickering, illusory door of light, Grim could vaguely sense the destructive fire energy on the other side of the door. The flame gate that led to the fire elemental plane slowly opened. The temperature in the magic room began to rise rapidly. The surrounding walls, floor, and ceiling all began to emit light barriers, blocking the overflowing fire elemental energy. Otherwise, with the intensity of the fire elemental energy released after the flame gate was opened, even the enchanted stones would not be able to withstand the magic flames for a long period of time. At that time, the little secret here would no longer be able to be hidden. Grim's tall figure stood in front of the flame gate. He raised his eyes and looked around. After making sure that all the defensive and alarm spell formations were activated and everything was going according to plan, he turned around and quickly stepped into the flame gate. This was a burning world. The sky was burning, the earth was burning, everything in the world was burning. There was no air, no food, and of course, no water source. However, just when you thought that this was a forbidden zone for life and that there was no life here, this strange world would use its strange and distorted laws to tell you that sometimes fire was also a form of life. After stepping into the flame gate, Grim quickly lost all of his senses. There was no sight, no hearing, no touch, no taste, and even the sense of space was gone. In this strange and distorted world, the only thing that could help him was his external spiritual force. It was as if he had sunk into a dark and bottomless abyss. Everything around him was hidden behind a heavy curtain of darkness, and he could not see anything no matter how hard he tried. After a short moment of panic, Grim regained his composure and quickly began to communicate with the AI chip. AI chip, what's wrong with me? Why can't I see anything? Beep. According to the laws of the elemental plane, there are no other elemental particles other than fire elemental particles. Hence, the human senses of the past are no longer suitable for this new world. Host must use spiritual force as a guide to reconstruct a new sensory system. Begin construction now. Beep. Accepting host command. Constructing new sensory system. Estimated time taken, 7 seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As the countdown was completed, Grim felt the darkness in front of him slowly fade away. The outlines of objects near and far became clearer, appearing once again in his field of vision. A strange spiritual force rippled out in all directions like ripples on the surface of water, sending all the objects he sensed back to the source of the ripples. A brand new world slowly appeared in front of Grim's eyes. Grim slowly turned his body and carefully sensed this strange world. This was a desolate and quiet grassland. Apart from 2 or 3 sharp rocks protruding from the ground, there were no other objects or life. Grim curiously squatted down and used his hand to touch the soft grass beneath his feet. The grass here was also completely different from the grass in the material plane. All the grass and wildflowers had no other colors. All of them were red. If not for the fact that the touch of his feet and hands were similar to that of the material plane, Grim would have suspected that they were just flames that had taken on a different form. Grim used a bit of strength and plucked a handful of red grass from the ground. He placed it in his palm and observed it carefully. It was just a bunch of ordinary grass, but from the roots to the leaves, it was bright red. Even the soil that the roots brought out was a dark red. After the fire grass left the ground, it seemed to lose the endless supply of fire elemental energy. It began to wither and lose all signs of life in the blink of an eye. In the next moment, the strange fire grass in Grim's palm, along with the soil that the roots wrapped around, exploded into sparks that filled the sky. Chapter 748. Damn it, isn't this fire grass? Grim's jaw dropped in shock. In the sorcerer world, fire grass could be considered a low-level sorcerer's resource. A pound of fire grass in perfect condition could be sold for 2 to 3 magic crystals. But here, Grim stood up and looked around at the fiery red grassland that stretched as far as the eye could see. The astonishment and shock in his heart had reached its peak. He screamed in his heart. If he could build a stable fire door here and send sorcerer's apprentices to harvest the firegrass, the Crimson family's finances would immediately improve. But after thinking about it, Grimm's agitated heart calmed down. The reason he was able to stay here was because the wizard's pagoda was continuously supplying the fire elemental altar with a large amount of energy to support the fire door. To maintain the stability of the fire door, the wizard's pagoda would need to continuously consume energy. This meant that every second he spent exploring the fire elemental plane was continuously consuming the magic crystal reserves of the Flame Monarch's pagoda. Just harvesting fire grass alone would not be enough to support such an extravagant exploration of another world. Furthermore, the environment of the fire elemental plane was so harsh that ordinary sorcerers' apprentices would not be able to survive here. Even official sorcerers would not be able to stay here for long periods of time. Otherwise, the continuous burning of the flames would sooner or later burn through their protective barrier and deplete their wizard power. In this place, even survival had become so difficult, let alone carrying out long hours of labor. Thinking about it this way, the idea of sending people here to harvest firegrass was a joke. No wonder no sorcerers had the idea of developing this place, even though there was such an abundance of fire element resources here. It turned out that the fundamental reason was that the gains did not match the costs. The gains did not make up for the losses. Grimm let out a self-deprecating laugh and dusted off the non-existent dust on his hands. He turned his attention to a few dark red rocks closest to him. Touching them with his hands, he could feel the coarseness and hardness of the surface of the rocks. They were no different from the rocks in the physical plane. However, when Grimm extended his mental energy into the interior of the rocks, he could immediately feel the pure, surging fire element energy within. Fire condensing rock was another kind of low-level fire element resource with good quality. If he'd had a large amount of fire condensate rock back then, he definitely wouldn't have used such low-quality volcanic rock to construct the blazing flame monarch. As expected of the fire elemental plane, not a single particle of earth, water, wind, light, darkness, or plant could be sensed in the entire plane's environment. Although the fire elemental plane still had a sky and land, the foundation of everything in this world was the ubiquitous fire elemental particles. However, under the guidance and restriction of the dimensional laws, these fire elemental particles existed in a completely different form. Once their special material form was broken, they would decompose into the most basic and primitive particles of fire element in the shortest time possible before merging back into this strange and distorted elemental world. With the powerful scanning ability of the AI chip, Grimm continued to analyze the strange world before him. Unlike the other foreign lands, he didn't feel the suffocating pressure of the plane here. The elemental realm was indeed one of the few completely open worlds in the multiverse. Perhaps due to the particularity of the formation of the elements realm, the plane space didn't reject the connection and overlap with the alien world. Spellcasters from any material plane could use simple spell formations to travel between the major elemental planes, even using them as a transit point for their travels. The elemental realm didn't reject the visits of outsiders, and it wouldn't guard it to the death like other material planes, afraid that some annoying bugs would burrow into their bodies. Grimm had once tried to activate his elemental vision, but he was blinded by the glaring red light and quickly shut it off in fear. Turning around, he saw that the door of flames was still standing quietly behind him. The dense fire elemental particles in the surrounding air were drawn over by the door of flames, entering the door of light and disappearing from his senses. As long as the door of flames existed, this place would maintain a close connection with the secret room in the wizard's pagoda. In a situation where the concentration of fire elemental particles on both sides was uneven, the fire elemental particles around the door of flames would naturally flow into the secret room in the wizard's pagoda. If such an obvious phenomenon were to be seen by intelligent fire elemental beings, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't run to the other side to find out what was going on. Since that was the case, It seemed like he had to set up some special wizard formations at the wizard's pagoda to prevent any ignorant fellows from running over to cause trouble. Grimm placed his right hand on the door of flames, silently connecting to the flame monarch's pagoda in the other world. Under his precise control, the door of flames started to slowly collapse and shrink, finally turning into a strange space node the size of a thumb. After compressing the door of flames into a space node, it couldn't shrink any further. At least, with Grimm's knowledge of space, he couldn't turn it into an invisible space singularity. Grimm didn't remove the connection between the space node and the Flame Monarch's pagoda. As long as the space node existed, Grimm didn't have to worry about his path of retreat being cut off. Even though this would continuously deplete the power of the wizard's pagoda, it was necessary for the space node to continue existing so that he wouldn't become a lost traveler. Once this spatial node disappeared, even if the blazing flame monarch immediately opened a new flaming gate, the chances of the gate being anchored in its original location were minuscule due to the error of the plane's movement and connection. It was extremely likely that it would appear in any region within 1,000 kilometers. If he was unlucky, it could even appear underground, inside a rock, or inside the body of an unlucky soul. If that happened, it would be extremely difficult for him to find it. The reason why Grimm inserted the destructive flames wizard staff into the wizard's pagoda as a carrier to support the door of flames was to leave a clear dimensional waymark. The destructive flames wizard staff had been with him for a long time, and he could clearly sense every elemental rhythm on it. That was why it was the perfect dimensional waymark. In this brand new world, the consciousness of the dimension was both friendly and unfriendly to Grimm. In his body, after several advancements, the part of him that belonged to the fire wizard had become abnormally active. He was like a wanderer who had been away from home for a long time, and he had an impulsive and irritable urge to rush into his mother's embrace. As for the part that belonged to the human race, it deeply felt the terror of this world, and it became abnormally depressed and dispirited. At this moment, Grimm still maintained his human form. His flesh and skin were completely covered by a bright red membrane, and he didn't have any contact with the air in this world. After all, with a human's flesh and blood, in such a brutal environment like the fire elemental plane, he wouldn't be able to last more than 3 seconds before he was burned to ashes. Even with Grimm's strength as a level 2 fire wizard, he would still feel the pressure of the harsh environment if he didn't transform into his body of flames. Grimm even attached some of his fire energy to his clothes to resist the invasion of the fire elemental plane. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to shamelessly run around naked. After doing all this, Grimm threw out a wizard-level earth elemental puppet. The 3-meter-tall earth elemental had just clumsily climbed up from the ground when it was engulfed in flames. 27 seconds later, the wizard-level earth elemental puppet silently disintegrated with the sound of its crystal core exploding. Its half-meter-thick clay shell was directly burned through by the flames, and the demon puppet core hidden deep within its body was burned into charcoal. As a result, in a situation where no one attacked it, it only lasted for 27 seconds before silently dying here. This was an earth elemental puppet with the highest defense. If it was a water elemental or wind elemental, it might not be able to last much longer. Grimm sighed silently. It seemed like his puppet army wouldn't be of much use here. He raised his head and looked into the distance. His field of vision was limited to a range of 271 meters. Everything outside of his field of vision was bright red, and he couldn't tell what was happening in the distance. Grimm grabbed a handful of soil from under his feet and lightly sprinkled it as he muttered a strange spell. A moment later, a pale, expressionless face appeared in the void. This was a low-level wizard spirit that was gathered from the ground using a spell. It could roughly ask for information about the situation within 100 miles. Are there any intelligent creatures nearby that I can communicate with? I need to know their location and number. East. Big guys. A lot. The pale face answered a few questions in the sorcerer's language before disappearing without a sound. Grimm sighed helplessly again. exchanging the energy of a rank 2 spell for a few simple and crude answers. This spirit summoning spell was really a pain in the ass sometimes. East, in this fire elemental plane where everything was bright red. How could it be considered east? Big guys? In the eyes of the wizard spirit, anything taller than Grim was considered big. A lot? This answer was even more of a pain in the ass. How much did a lot actually mean? However, in this unknown world, it was already not bad to have this kind of information. Grim rubbed his head with difficulty. He could only place his hopes on the Chip's analysis. Since it was a wizard spirit summoned by a spell, it naturally followed the rules of the Magi. Soon, the AI Chip confirmed the location of the east and marked it with a blue arrow in Grim's field of vision. Grim looked to the west and pondered for a moment. In the end, he followed the direction of the blue arrow and ran. The contract indicated that the rank 2 Lord of the Flames was somewhere in the west. However, Grim was still at the stage of exploring the fire elemental plane, so he couldn't think about killing it for now. Chapter 749. In the direction pointed out by the shaman spirit, Grim encountered a group of flaming spirits. Compared to ordinary fire elementals, these humanoid flaming spirits possessed basic intelligence and social attributes. They were entrenched on top of a burning black mountain, refusing all creatures from the outside world to get close. From the looks of it, they seemed to be guarding something. Grim stealthily approached the black, flaming mountain, silently observing the actions of the burning flame spirits. These flaming spirits were indeed huge. Even the young ones were 3 meters tall. As for the grade 1 and grade 2 ones, they were 5 to 7 meters tall. From the outside, they looked like a group of humanoid creatures made of bright yellow flames. They had humanoid bodies, arms, and heads, but the parts below their waists were hazy clouds of fire. After observing for a long time, Grim could not distinguish their gender. Perhaps these elemental creatures did not have gender at all. While Grim was silently observing, most of the young flaming spirits hid in the black mountain to play, not leaving it for even a moment. As for the adult flaming spirits, they formed patrol teams, constantly patrolling around the black mountain. Each team was made up of 6 flaming spirits. The leader was grade 2, while the rest were grade 1. At the top of the black mountain, there were some holes that looked like beehives, which might be their nest. However, due to the presence of the patrol teams, Grim could not get too close to the black mountain, so he could not find out what was going on. All the fire elemental creatures lived in the fire elemental plane. They did not need food, water, and air like humans, but they still needed an endless supply of fire elemental energy. To be honest, most of the fire elemental creatures living in the fire elemental plane were extremely violent, and they desperately wanted to grow stronger. To them, a place where the dense fire elemental energy gathered was their home. Since these flaming spirits were using the Black Mountain as their home, there was either a strong fire elemental energy gathering point inside the Black Mountain, or there were some fire elemental items or treasures inside. Grim hid around the Black Mountain for a long time, and finally made up his mind to attack these flaming spirits. Of course, the main reason was that he did not find any Type 3 flaming spirits among them, and he urgently needed to accumulate some combat experience. So after hesitating for a long time, Grim finally couldn't help but make his move. This was a sparse forest at the foot of the Black Mountain. Tall, rugged fire trees were scattered in an area with a circumference of 30 miles. They had no leaves, no tender branches, and on their thick trunks, there were only sharp thorns that rose straight into the sky. Through the dark red skin, one could vaguely see the red viscous liquid flowing slowly inside. Its shape resembled flowing magma. The sharp roots of the fire tree pierced deep into the soil, desperately absorbing the abundant fire energy from the earth fire. In this cinder tree forest, a group of burning flame spirits was advancing silently. There was no day or night in the fire elemental plane, so most fire creatures had no concept of time. As long as it was a mission given by their leader, they would carry it out seriously. Only when more than half of the fire energy in their bodies was consumed would they return to their nest to replenish their energy. If there was enough fire energy in their bodies, they could even stick to their posts for years. As for this group of burning flame spirits, their mission was to patrol this cinder tree forest, so they had walked this fixed route tens of thousands of times. They were abnormally familiar with every cinder tree and every piece of land along the way. Their mission was, of course, to expel the low-tier fire elementals that wandered over and guard against the sneak attacks of other fire creatures. In the fire elemental plane, there were no grudges between fire creatures. The only reason they fought was to snatch each other's fire elemental gathering points. Therefore, the war between the two groups had never stopped. Today, this group of burning flame spirits once again set foot on this familiar path, silently passing through the eerie cinder trees that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. At the front of the group was the grade 2 flame spirit that was leading the group. It was at least 7 meters tall. On its humanoid head, there was a pair of golden flames burning fiercely. When it swayed its body and slowly floated between the cinder trees, it could see everything within a radius of 1 to 2 miles. However, when they advanced less than half a mile into the cinder tree forest, a wandering fire elemental half a mile in front of them barged into their alert range. This was a beginner fire elemental that was only a meter tall and only had the strength of an apprentice. It walked between the cinder trees in a daze, as if it had yet to gain sentience. Of course, if it had really gained sentience, it would not have ignored the warning signs left by the burning flame spirits and barged into the vicinity of the giant black mountain. Seeing that another little fellow had barged into their forbidden area, the grade 2 burning flame spirit leading the group waved its arm and ordered impatiently, "Doug, go kill it." Upon receiving the order, the grade 1 flame spirit at the end of the group responded. It lowered its body and suddenly sped up, charging towards the ungrateful fire elemental in the distance. With the difference in strength between the two, a single punch from the grade 1 flame spirit would be enough to destroy the fire core of the other party, causing it to vanish into thin air. When the grade 1 flame spirit was within 100 meters of it, the beginner fire elemental seemed to have sensed danger. It actually turned around and ran without saying a word. It actually knows how to run. The grade 1 flame spirit called Doug could not help but be surprised. The fire cloud in its lower limbs became more and more urgent, and its pursuit speed also increased. 70 meters, 50 meters, 30 meters, 10 meters, the distance between the two continued to decrease until Doug was completely behind the fire elemental. It raised its huge fist of flames and fiercely smashed it at the blazing firestone within the body of the beginner fire elemental. Be careful. The grade 2 flame spirit that had stopped to watch the battle from afar was originally watching indifferently. However, when its subordinates approached the beginner fire elemental, it suddenly felt an abnormal fluctuation of fire elemental energy. Unfortunately, its warning was too late. Suddenly, a 7-meter-tall Balrog jumped out from behind a fire tree on the side. The moment it appeared, it aimed a killing blow at the grade 1 flame spirit. A huge lava fist smashed down, instantly turning the head of the grade 1 flame spirit into a ball of scattered flames. Before the grade 1 flame spirit could move its headless body out of the attack range, a lava hand had already pierced through its chest and dug out the fire core within. To a fire elemental creature, all of its fire energy and consciousness originated from this strange fire core. Once it was destroyed or taken away, the remaining body of fire would become an unrestrained wildfire, instantly dispersing into the air. Bastard! Hurry up and hand over Doug's fire core. The burning flame spirits in the distance were dumbfounded. Under the lead of the grade 2 flame spirit, they rushed over in a frenzy. They could clearly see that the terrifying flame demon that had killed their companion was also a frightening grade 2 creature. On their side, they had a grade 2 captain and 4 grade 1 companions. If they really fought against the flame demon, they would not be at a disadvantage. Unfortunately, with their low intelligence. How could they escape the schemes of a grade 2 sorcerer? By the time they reached the terrifying flame demon, Grimm had already sealed off their path of retreat. The battle only lasted for a quarter of an hour before it quickly ended. Both sides were fire elemental creatures, and all fire damage was greatly reduced. However, relying on their superior numbers, the flame spirits kept attacking the terrifying flame demon with fire arrows, flints, and other means. The two lava shields outside its body splashed magma, and flames flew everywhere. The grade 2 flame spirits were even more ferocious. They actually swung their fists at the terrifying flame demon. One had a body of fire, while the other had the body of flame demon. One only had a flame shield, while the other had a lava shield with higher defense. When these two big guys punched each other, the scene of the battle was unprecedentedly fierce and tyrannical. Seeing that the terrifying flame demon had the absolute advantage against the grade 2 flame spirits, Grimm did not hesitate to attack the remaining 4 grade 1 flame spirits. Both sides used fire spells, but the grade 1 flame spirits' bodies were not as sturdy as Grimm's lava shield. After 2 or 3 exchanges, one of Grimm's lava shields was destroyed, and only one of the 4 grade 1 flame spirits remained. The other 3 were blasted into pieces by the solid lava fireball. Even the core of the flames within their bodies was melted. Grimm used Flame Leap and appeared behind the remaining grade 1 flame spirit. He stretched out his hand, and a large hand made of pure fire elements grabbed the flame spirit firmly. "Let's go." The flame spirits on the mountain seemed to have been alerted. Grimm turned around and looked into the distance. He saw groups of flame elementals rushing down the black mountain at high speed. He snorted and clasped his hands together. The remaining flame spirit was crushed into pieces by his fiery hands. When the big hand opened again, there was only a fist-sized core of flames left, its surface still burning fiercely. At this moment, the flame demon condensed a 30-meter-long flaming whip from the void and wrapped it around the fleeing Tier 2 flame spirit. Chapter 750. The fact that a grade 2 flame spirit was taken down so easily was out of Grimm's expectations. However, in the next second, Grimm's delight was replaced by a deep sense of fear. Beep. Warning. Energy disturbance detected. Countdown to explosion of the core. 5, 4, 3. Throw it. Hurry up and throw it away. Fortunately, the Balrog had a direct spiritual link with Grimm. By the time Grimm realized something was wrong, the Balrog had already flung the grade 2 flame spirit into the distance with all its might. As the chip finished its countdown, the flame spirit that had flown 100 meters away suddenly vibrated with energy, and a small mushroom cloud exploded on the spot. This short amount of time was not enough for Grimm and the Balrog to teleport out of the explosion's range. Hence, the moment they appeared 200 meters away with Flaming Leap, the terrifying shockwave of flames had already caught up to them. Grimm's robes were instantly torn to shreds by the flames. The Balrog turned around and stood in front of Grimm, using its thick and sturdy back to block the shockwave. If someone were to look down from above the fire grove, they would see a huge and violent ring of flames rapidly engulfing everything within a 5-kilometer radius. Even the deep-rooted 10,000-year fire trees were destroyed like simple thatched huts by the shockwaves of the flames. The terrifying flaming mushroom cloud, the surging shockwave, the devastating flame wave. The entire scene immediately presented a horrifying scene, as if it was the end of the world. If this was a material plane, such a terrifying energy explosion would definitely leave a bottomless pit in the ground. It might even corrode through the rock stratum and force the magma out, forming a small lava lake. However, this was a fire elemental plane after all. Most of the damage from the flames was absorbed by the surrounding air and earth, although the shockwave from the explosion seemed earth-shattering and frightening. The energy level of the flames would decrease by 1 or 2 ranks every kilometer extended. When the sea of flames extended to a 5-kilometer radius, The temperature had dropped from 13,000 degrees Celsius to 300 degrees Celsius. This temperature was close to the average temperature of a fire elemental plane. After the wave of flames subsided, Grim finally managed to stand up straight. On the other hand, the body of the Balrog that stood before him was in tatters. Even its body, that was composed of sturdy lava boulders and flowing magma, had large areas of damage. With a crack, the terrifying flame demon's body disintegrated, once again shrinking from a 7-meter-tall flame monster into a fist-sized demon puppet crystal core. The rank 2 flame spirit's self-detonation had severely overdrawn the elemental energy stored in the demon puppet crystal core. The terrifying flame demon could no longer maintain its huge body and was forced back to its original form. Roars and roars could be heard from afar, and they were rapidly approaching. Grim picked up the demon puppet core without hesitation, turned around, and fled the scene of the battle. Grim ran back to where the flame gate was and returned it to its original size. Then he entered the gate. Then the huge light gate formed by pure flames quickly collapsed. A quarter of an hour later, a large group of burning flame spirits chased after them and firmly surrounded the grassland that still had strange spatial fluctuations. A moment later, a female flame spirit with a complete human form appeared in the middle of the group. With her appearance, all the flame spirits bowed in greeting, even the rank 2 flame spirits. Lord Manzida, the enemy escaped from here. A rank 2 flame spirit leading the group took a step forward and introduced respectfully. This new high-ranked flame spirit was not like her low-ranked companions, who had the upper half of a human and the lower half of a fire cloud. Instead, she had the complete body of a female human. Her body was curvaceous, and she wore a strange dark red armor. Her facial features were distinct, but they were not as delicate and gentle as those of a real human. Her reddish-brown hair was draped over her back, and from time to time, there would be clusters of beautiful little flames. I can smell the aura of an evil magus from another world. It seems like the one who ambushed our patrol team was a magus from the magus world. Now that he's escaped, you don't have to worry anymore. However, from today onwards, keep a close watch on all the weak points in the space within 100 miles of the Black Mountain. If you find any evil magi sneaking over, immediately send troops to kill them. Yes. With the various flame spirits receiving their orders, the burning flame spirits that had gathered here began to disperse one after another. The remaining flame spirits worked together to set up a warning trap around the weak point in the space. This way, if any outsiders tried to sneak into the fire elemental plane, they would be notified immediately. Grim, who had escaped back to the blazing flame monarch in one go, only relaxed after the door of fire had completely disappeared. The short adventure in the fire elemental plane had allowed him to understand how terrifying other worlds were. While the rank 2 burning flame spirit had a powerful body, it did not have many battle techniques or killing methods. The way they fought was still so primitive and clumsy. It seemed like the battle between the fire creatures relied more on close combat. The fire spells they used were just a method to control and wear down their opponent's patience. However, while their methods were primitive, their temperaments were tyrannical and vicious. Not only were they vicious to their enemies, they were vicious to themselves as well. Once they were defeated or captured, they would detonate their flame cores the moment they lost control of their bodies. That was the final vessel that carried their consciousnesses. Once they self-destructed, the last trace of their existence would be erased. This sort of ruthlessness and decisiveness was not something an ordinary person could achieve. Grim stood on the fire elemental altar for a while. Only when the spatial undulations had completely calmed down and there were no signs of another world invading did he heave a sigh of relief. He opened his palm. In his left hand was the core to summon the terrifying Balrog, while in his right were the cores of 3 rank 1 flame spirits. Due to the difference in rank and strength, the 3 rank 1 flame spirits were not able to self-destruct before Grim destroyed their bodies and dug out their cores. Now that they were in Grim's hands, Even if their consciousnesses were still attached to the cores, they could no longer self-destruct. However, after taking a closer look at the cores, Grimm could not help but furrow his brows. He had the AI chip scan the cores of the Balrog puppets, and finally obtained more detailed information. If he wanted to completely repair it, it would probably take him at least a month to complete. The gains did not make up for the losses. He had obtained the cores of 3 rank 1 flame spirits, but the cores of the terrifying rank 2 Balrog puppets had been damaged. This was a loss. It was no wonder that Magi liked to travel together when exploring other worlds. It turned out that the risks were so great. Grimm shook his head and sighed. He could only turn around and walk out of the secret room. The next exploration of the fire elemental plane would be in a month's time. The forest was dense, and the giant trees towered into the sky. A group of 5 adventurers cut their way through the thistles and thorns, making their way through the dark forest with great difficulty. The one in charge of paving the way was a burly bald man with a sturdy physique. He wore leather armor and wielded a long blade. He spent a great deal of effort to cut down the intersecting vines and used his huge body to carve out a winding path in the shrubbery where there was nowhere to stand. Behind him were 4 strange figures of varying heights, and their entire bodies were shrouded in thick black robes. The few of them advanced in silence. Apart from the heavy breathing of the burly bald man, they could not hear anything else. "Where are we now? How far are we from Snakebird Cliff?" Suddenly, the skinniest black-robed person in the middle of the group could not help but ask in a low voice. From her voice, it seemed that she was a beautiful and gentle young lady. "Eek, be quiet. This is the dark forest. If there is no danger, it's best not to make a sound." The tallest and sturdiest black-robed person reprimanded in a low voice. Although his tone was not strict, it revealed a trace of convincing dignity. "All right, Boss Pang, we all know your abilities. This is only the edge of the dark forest. Could it be that there is still any danger for you?" The black-robed person walking at the back of the group was obviously driven mad by the gloomy and stifling environment of the forest. He took off his hood and took in large gulps of the damp and gloomy air. They were acolytes with weak bodies. If they were to put on the metal armor, they would not even be able to walk half a mile in the dark forest before collapsing from exhaustion. Hence, in order to prevent the sharp thorns and broken branches from cutting their skin, they could only put on a thick traveler's robe over their robes. The most direct consequence of this was that each and every one of them was about to suffocate to death. The one called Boss Pang was naturally the young quasi-sorcerer with an affinity with the dark element, Ponter. This time, he personally led his 4 close subordinates to Snakebird Cliff for the sake of those delicious snakebird eggs. Of course, now was the breeding season for the snakebird beasts. If they could steal 1 or 2 snakebird babies from their nests, they would be able to make a lot of money. However, no matter what, the snakebird beasts were a type of quasi-sorcerer magical creature. Once their whereabouts were exposed, it would be difficult for them to escape unscathed. Chapter 751. Shadow Light Team. Leader, prospective wizard Ponter, male, 37 years old, talent with dark elements. There were 4 members: Body Refinery Apprentice, Daxo, Advanced, Plant Apprentice, Eichel, Female, Intermediate, Shape-Shifting Apprentice, Blanc, Intermediate, and Goblin Magician Locke Jr., Beginner. Little Locke was not qualified to join the Shadow Light Team. However, Eek's strong recommendation, coupled with the fact that Locke's path as a magician didn't focus too much on individual strength, and that he had some strange characteristics that other professions didn't have, Ponter allowed him to become a member of the team. This team of 5 had Body Refinery Apprentice Daxo as a tank, Plant Apprentice Eco as a healer, and a magic machinist who was good at scouting and disrupting the situation. This way, even if they encountered powerful magical beasts, they would be able to deal with them calmly. The core of the team, prospective wizard Ponter, would be the one to deal the most damage. As for the shape-shifting school, it was a strange advancement path that had suddenly appeared in the White Tower over the past 6 months. Most of the knowledge in it came from a magical world called Fairn. It was said that there was a magical class called the Druid who could communicate with animals and plants with their natural affinity. The most powerful ability of the Druid was to transform into a ferocious magical beast at will. Then, with the instantaneous racial ability and strong body, they would be invincible on the battlefield. After the Crimson family obtained this knowledge from another world, they slightly modified it into a new subject within the family, the shape-shifting school. Wizard apprentices who mastered the shape-shifting spell could freely switch between Violent Hellbear, Shadow Cheetah, and Wind Eagle. This allowed them to have more diverse and unpredictable combat methods. Of course, these three transformations were only basic subjects that all shape-shifting apprentices had to master. If they wanted more powerful transformations, they would need a large number of points and magic crystals to exchange for knowledge from the family library. Hence, during this period of time, the lucrative family missions in the nearby Dark Forest had become extremely popular, and they were practically monopolized by combat teams formed by quasi-sorcerers the moment they appeared. As for the lone wolves in the wilderness, or those who had no one to rely on, they could only pick up some small missions that others looked down on, or simply squat in the wizard's pagoda and slowly grind their daily routines. The progress of a sorcerer apprentice was almost entirely dependent on accumulating points and magic crystals. If he was slow at first, he would be slow at every step. He would only have to clean the laboratory, help the official sorcerers sort out some magic materials, and act as the manager of the magic facilities. It would be wishful thinking for him to advance by leaps and bounds with such a job. That was why in the past few days, the Scarlet Apprentices with some ability had all been mobilized. They had almost completely cleared out the Dark Forest around the White Tower. Some of the ferocious monsters that resided here were naturally unwilling to be chased away. They began to frequently ambush the Crimson Acolytes that came out to do quests. A few teams had already been ambushed, and there were casualties among the Scarlet Apprentices. Because of this, the family had specially sent the insect Lich, Lord Bliss, into the Black Forest to kill 11 Lord-ranked monsters in one go. As a result, the previously arrogant magical creatures immediately disappeared and began to show signs of migration into the depths of the Dark Forest. However, in this way, the danger level of the Black Forest immediately dropped by several levels, and it quickly became the best place for all acolytes to train and explore. Do you want to die, Blanc? Ponter reprimanded with dissatisfaction. Though the Lord-ranked monsters here have all been eliminated by Lord Bliss, there are still many Magus monsters left. Do you think a team like ours will be able to escape from these guys alive? Boss, we can't be that unlucky, can we? Blanc was a sharp-tongued and slippery youth. He wore light leather armor, and there were 2 blue lines below the family crest of the burning iron fist on his chest. This signified that he had already grasped the other 2 transformation spells besides the Gale Eagle. No one knows if I've mastered it or not. However, if we really meet an enemy, I'll definitely stuff you into the monster's mouth first. Ponter threatened fiercely, but anyone could hear the mocking tone in his voice. Why don't we find a place to rest for a while? The female acolyte, Ike, said gently. We've already been walking in the Black Forest for half a day. It's time to find a place to rest and tidy up. During this period of time, Ike and Ponter's relationship had rapidly improved. He naturally obeyed the words of his sweetheart. Little Loke, hurry and find a clean and safe place nearby. Got it. Upon receiving the order, the little goblin who had been quietly waiting in the middle of the team immediately took out the eyeball mech from his waist pouch and tossed it into the air. A metal ball the size of a human head floated gently in the air. Asterisk creak. Asterisk following the sound of mechanical gears grinding, the mysterious patterns on the surface of the eyeball mech began to light up one by one. Then, a hidden metal door opened, revealing a dark red mechanical eyeball inside. The mechanical eyeball could move and explore freely like a human eye. When the broken ruby in the middle of the eyeball began to charge, it could shoot out a sharp, scorching ray of light, giving it a decent attack. The little goblin then took out a strange-looking metal hat and put on his head. The top of the hat was equipped with a thought wave amplifier, so even if the eyeball mech was 3 to 5 miles away, it could still be remotely controlled. The front of the metal cap was equipped with a monocle that gave off a sci-fi vibe. It could project everything that the eyeball mech saw onto the tiny lens, allowing the little goblin to grasp the situation of the battlefield around the eyeball mech at all times. After all the preparations were done, the eyeball mech whizzed into the surrounding forest following Little Loke's command. It nimbly bypassed the dense foliage and thick branches, evaded the hanging vines, and quickly disappeared into the depths of the dark forest. Little Loke held his breath and focused on controlling the eyeball mech to quickly shuttle through the black forest. As he flew at top speed, he quickly scanned the forest below him. Soon, Little Loke could not help but let out a soft cry. Found it. In that direction, 3 miles away. There's a relatively hidden call with a water source around it. It's more suitable for camping. Ponder nodded in satisfaction. Although the little goblin's combat ability was not that great, his small waist pouch was filled with all kinds of strange magical equipment, each of which had unique special abilities. All in all, he was a good adventurer. Let's go. Let's rest there for an hour before continuing our journey. We must reach the family's camp number 3 before dark. Let's go. Ponder's order made all the team members exclaim softly. Everyone's pace immediately became lighter, just like their current mood. The so-called family campsite was actually a temporary campsite that Lord Blitz had transformed from the original lair of the Lord-class magical beasts into a temporary campsite. All the teams of apprentices who were adventuring in the Black Forest could seek temporary shelter in one of the nearby family camps if they could not find a more suitable and safe camp. There was a protective spell formation set up by a magus and a clean place to rest. It was far better than sleeping in the open and eating hard bread every day. However, what made the apprentices most satisfied was the safety there. They could light a bonfire in the family camp, barbecuing or cooking delicious food, and there were also clean and tidy beds. What more could they ask for if they could enjoy such treatment in the Black Forest? Deep in the Black Forest, at the top of a low cliff, a black-robed Bliss stood alone in the cold wind, allowing the cold wind to blow at the corners of his robes. When the Shadow Optics team slowly approached the family's camp number 3, Bliss finally turned his body and aimed his 2 big and 2 small green eyes at a certain place in the boundless forest. At this moment, the entire Black Forest was covered with his eyeworms. Any team of acolytes that infiltrated the Black Forest seemed to be alone and without anyone to rely on, but in fact, everything they did was under the strict supervision of the insect Lich Bliss. The family had not sent Bliss here to eliminate those brainless and stupid lords of the monsters, but to secretly protect the family's newly developed strength. Bliss would not rashly interfere with acolytes' normal training and exploration. Even if the team was in danger, as long as the risk was within an acceptable range, he would not interfere. After all, only when the acolytes were on the brink of life and death could they gain nourishment from it. However, if the acolytes encountered a powerful monster that they could not defeat, or if the whole team was about to be annihilated, the insect Lich Bliss would secretly take action and use a covert method to save them from danger. Of course, the clan would never announce such a thing to the public. Hence, the insect Lich Bliss mission was not only arduous, but also trivial. If not for his omnipresent eyeworms and his terrifyingly powerful insect army, normal magi would not be able to take on this underground babysitting type of protection mission. Of course, other than protection, the insect Lich Bliss also had the mission to expel those ferocious and violent monsters. And now, with the unexpected discovery of an eye worm in the distance, Bliss had found traces of a human-shaped magic scorpion. This kind of monster with a strong arachnid style was actually the one that Bliss was most interested in. From them, Bliss could always extract many evolutionary factors that were helpful to him. Chapter 752. The Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. Grimm slowly awoke from his deep slumber. The first thing he did after opening his eyes was let the AI chip scan his body to confirm his mental state. Beep. Host's spiritual force is 26, 3892. Grim furrowed his brows, once again feeling the mysteriousness and power of the wizard world. Even though the AI chip scan of his spiritual force was accurate to 4 decimal places, and even though he had undergone 4 hours of deep meditation the night before, his spiritual force seemed to have been locked down by a mysterious force. However, the value of his mental strength seemed to be completely locked by a mysterious force, and his daily deep meditation could no longer increase it in the slightest. Grim had the AI chip scan his cerebral cortex more thoroughly, but it was a pity that it could not find the crux of the wizard's contract restricting his progress. After all, the domain that the AI chip controlled was made up of real matter. Once he encountered such a mysterious and illusory spell, he could only rely on Grim's spiritual force to slowly sense it and comprehend it. In truth, Grim had even suspected that the wizard's contract was using hypnosis to lock down his strength. He had even allowed the AI chip to hypnotize him instead. Unfortunately, he had failed. After a period of research, Grim was finally sure that the wizard's contract was affecting his spiritual force through the hidden laws of the plane. Because this kind of power had already exceeded the scope of his current strength, it was not something that he could analyze and break alone. Want to research the laws of the plane? He had to push his spiritual force to the point where he could analyze the laws of the plane. This was a hard nut to crack. If he could not reach this level, he would not have the right to come into contact with the laws of the plane. If he could not come into contact with the laws of the plane, how could he research it? Fortunately, with the help of the AI chip, Grim did not come out of this undeserved calamity unscathed. At the very least, after going against the wizard's contract, Grim unexpectedly had a vague understanding of the workings of the laws of the plane. It could not be helped, as the laws of the plane were affecting him. Grim frowned as he slowly sat up on his bed. The first thing he did after waking up was to wash up. However, after advancing to a Grade 2 fire wizard, Grim had naturally developed a dislike for the water elemental particles and even the natural world water. Under normal circumstances, apart from the water required to maintain a human's body, Grim rarely showered. Grim's house was big, very big. Apart from the luxurious bed in the middle of the room, the huge and luxurious magic mirror in the corner was the most eye-catching. But at this moment, Grim stood upright in front of the magic mirror. The numerous blood elf maids that had been waiting for a long time swarmed forward and surrounded him, busying themselves enthusiastically and briskly. She helped him undo the light and soft nightgown, helped him take off the weightless spider silk underwear, and helped him smooth his waist-long dark red hair. When all his clothes were taken off, Grim was completely naked. His exposed muscles were graceful and smooth. His muscles were well-defined, strong, and plump, and there was almost not a trace of excess fat on his body. The proportions of his limbs could also be described as perfect and coordinated. Through his translucent skin, one could even see the pure flame energy flowing slowly like magma within his dark red body. Coupled with the dark red long hair that draped over his back and the burning black pupils that were so bright that no one dared to look at them directly, Grim's entire body was overflowing with a demonic and mysterious aura. The blood elf maids surrounding him all had greedy and thirsty gazes in their eyes as they lovingly scanned every muscle and line on Grim's well-built body. They were intoxicated by their male master's manly aura, and the pure, surging blood energy in his body made them even crazier. Grim clenched his fists tightly, and a bright red flame seeped out of the countless pores on his body, instantly turning him into a tall and mighty human figure made of flames. A moment later, all the dust, skin, and other substances on his body disappeared without a trace in the flames that quickly swept past him. With Grim's current control over fire, even if the blood elf maids surrounded him, they would not be harmed by the elemental flames at all. The blood elf maids seemed to be used to such a scene, and as soon as the flames disappeared, they swarmed him once again and helped him put on a brand new set of spider silk underwear, as well as the red robe that represented the dignity of a fire wizard. Throughout the entire process, Grimm just stood there with his eyes closed. He didn't even need to move his pinky to complete the entire process. As for the little molestation of the seductresses during the changing process, it was difficult to avoid. They circled around Grimm and laughed softly, revealing their seductiveness. Their slender fingers even took the opportunity to lightly brush past Grimm's muscles that were filled with explosive power. Their coquettish laughter rang out incessantly, and their teasing movements were even more enchanting. If there were too many wolves and not enough meat, and if not for Grimm's hidden majesty preventing them from being too impudent, some of the blood elves might have already taken the initiative to throw themselves into his arms. They could be considered to have seen it clearly, since their master was willing to place them by her beloved wizard's side. It went without saying that there was a reason behind it. Besides, if they could charm this handsome and tough wizard to have sex with him, they were willing to bear the consequences, even if they had to suffer a small punishment from their mistress, Mary. After all, his robust physique and scalding blood energy were all things that they could only dream of evolving into. If it was in the past, Grimm might not have been able to control himself with so many women throwing themselves at him, even with his self-control. However, with the improvement of his strength and willpower, such shallow seductions could no longer move the deeply hidden human heart in him. It was fine for him to copulate mercilessly without love to soothe his body and mind, but it was still a taboo for ambitious people to indulge in lust. After trying to entangle with Grimm for a while, the blood elf maids could only leave regretfully when they saw that Grimm's gaze was still cold and imposing. A moment later, Grimm sat calmly in the spacious living room and began to eat his breakfast. When the warm sunlight shone into the room through the long, narrow window, Grimm felt a sense of warmth. Only then did he begin to leisurely enjoy the medium-rare earth fire dragon ribs. A level 1 blood elf female spellcaster stood beside him with her back bowed. She used a gentle and melodious voice to report to him the recent financial situation of the family, as well as the intelligence gathered by the 2 wizard pagodas. The flame monarch was deep underground, and there was naturally no warm sunlight. Thus, everything that Grimm was enjoying was actually simulated by the wizard's pagoda using elemental energy. When it came to creating a good state of mind, the wizards were never stingy. The roasted meat on the plate in front of him weighed at least 2 kilograms and had been carefully smoked and roasted. The skin was fragrant and golden, while the insides were tender and soft. There was even a layer of fragrant sauce on the surface of the meat. Grimm tucked in his napkin, picked up his silver knife and fork, and lightly cut off a small piece. He placed it in his mouth, and the complex taste of the delicacy exploded in his mouth. There was the delicacy of the food, and the sauce complemented it. However, what Grimm was most intoxicated with was the rich fire elemental energy that surged between his teeth. It had to be said that a single bite of the earth fire dragon ribs that had been prepared using a secret method was no less than a quarter of an hour of deep meditation. Furthermore, this method of replenishing fire elemental energy did not have any side effects, and there was no problem of excessive consumption. It was the favorite method of all wizards. However, good Terra fire dragon beasts were usually hidden in the depths of lava volcanoes. It was not an easy task to find their tracks and successfully kill them. If Grimm had not discovered a small group of earth fire dragons in the lava tunnels beneath the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda, he might not have dared to indulge in such an extravagant feast of earth fire dragons that cost hundreds of magical crystals. Of course, it was not as if there was no delicacy better than the earth fire dragons in the world. At the very least, in the areas that Grimm could get his hands on, there was a better substitute for the earth fire dragons. That was fire dragon meat. The earth fire dragon was a type of subdragon, a branch of the dragon race's many mixed blood descendants. Compared to a real fire dragon, the quality of its meat was naturally many times worse. Grimm did not get a taste of the level 2 fire dragon from before. Other than some leftovers, the rest was all eaten by Ollie. Truth be told, the level 2 fire dragon was the size of a small hill when it fell to the ground, and Ollie's body was so petite. Even now, Grim could not imagine how she managed to devour the entire level 2 fire dragon. Even though Grim wanted to take a look, Ollie chased them away with the excuse that it was a private matter. Furthermore, when the Firemaw Draconians launched a large-scale attack, everyone was too busy fighting and had forgotten about this matter. Level 2 fire dragons were not easy to find, but there were plenty of level 1 fire dragons in the Lance Realm. Over the past few days, Grim had given the brain monster, Gazruega, many missions. He wanted it to quickly investigate the number of level 1 fire dragons, as well as their respective habitats. Once this information was in place, Grim's dragon-slaying team from the Crimson family would be able to secure a fire dragon feast. As he devoured the delicacy in front of him, Grim silently listened to the information regarding his family and the wizard's pagoda. He did not comment on most of the information, only allowing the AI chip to store it. Only when he encountered something that interested him would he stop eating and let the beautiful blood elf spellcaster analyze it in detail. Chapter 753. The Magus world seemed to be at war with another powerful plane. This information was definitely reliable. It came from the leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice. Originally, with Grim's qualifications and wealth, it would have been impossible for him to come into contact with this level of power and information. If Alice had not given him all the information that the Witches of Destiny had obtained, Grim would not have known about this fight between gods, even if the heavens fell and the earth split apart. According to Alice's information, the Magus world seemed to be at war with a small branch of the world of gods, the Orc Pantheon. The so-called world of gods was not like the native gods of Faerun. Instead, it was a camp of gods formed by a powerful pantheon that had a wide range of beliefs across planes. No matter how powerful the gods of Faerun were, they only had a single faith of a certain isolated race. Once the Faerun plane was overthrown, these gods would have no other way out than to perish. Most of the gods in the world of gods had spread their faith to more than 200 planes. This way, they had many followers, and the power of faith they gathered naturally increased. Their divine force was so strong that it made people despair. Moreover, these gods who possessed faith across planes could no longer be easily wiped out by the destruction of a single plane of faith. As long as we don't destroy all the believers we spread, we won't have any risk of dying. If there was anyone in the multiverse who could truly live forever, it would be these gods who had faith across planes. The one that was at war with the Magus world was one of the more powerful pantheons in the world of gods, the Orc Pantheon. Their main god was the beast god, who possessed the strength of a tier 8 beast god, and he also had the terrifying title of One-Eyed Tyrant. He was tyrannical by nature and crazed for battle. Most of his followers were cruel and bloodthirsty barbarians. As he usually appeared as a one-eyed male orc covered in heavy and crude black armor, his fanatical followers would often look away to show their respect. And this orc master god, Ash, had nearly 20 gods of various sizes under his command. All of them were orc gods who were adept at fighting and killing. This time, for some unknown reason, the powerful orc god system had actually clashed with the sorcerer's world. Both sides fought against each other in countless outer plane worlds, destroying each other's subsidiary planes. For a time, the flames of war spread to hundreds and thousands of large, medium, and small plane worlds. As the origin of the sorcerer faction, the sorcerer world was naturally carefully protected by the great sorcerers and was not involved in the war. However, in response to the call of the extraterrestrial great sorcerers, the sorcerer's world had also sent out a large number of sorcerers' legions to various battlefields, fighting to the death with the believers of the orc god system in countless material planes. According to what Alice had revealed, in the past 100 years alone, there were already 7 large, medium, and small dimensions that had been involved in the flames of war and were either destroyed or destroyed. Even if there were billions of living beings in each plane, the total number of living beings that had perished in the flames of war had already reached a shocking number. It was a pity that even such a brutal and bloody war was merely an insignificant ripple in the vast multiverse. The other gods of the world of gods, as well as the many powerful races of the multiverse, were only watching this small conflict with the attitude of a spectator. In the eyes of those high and mighty experts, 100 years and billions of lives were nothing more than a game of chess that was played by them. One of the main reasons why Alice had revealed this information to Grimm was that she did not want him to misjudge the true strength of the Northern Witches. In the past 100 years, most of the Northern Witches' strength had been involved in this war. Therefore, the strength of the factions of the Northern Witches that Grimm had investigated and sensed did not represent their true strength. Once the various factions of the Northern Witches had summoned back the sorcerers that had been stationed in the secondary planes, their strength would immediately increase by 5 to 6 times. If the extraterrestrial great sorcerers were to get involved, the Crimson family and the Witches of Destiny would not be able to do anything to them. If Alice had not broken free from the puppet control of the first Witch of Destiny, they would still have a powerful Witch of Destiny to rely on. It was a pity that Alice had killed the puppet avatar left behind by the first Witch of Destiny, which also made him the enemy of the other party. In the days since she had become the new leader of the Witch of Destiny, Alice had been trying her best to understand one thing. Why had the Tower of Destiny opened again? Why had she been involved in this War of Destiny? Why had the first Witch of Destiny left behind such a terrifying puppet? In the past, she could not understand, no matter how much she thought about it. Even if she expended her life force to deduce and divine, she would not receive any response or feedback from the Magus world. However, ever since she had advanced to Grade 2, it was as if she had broken free from an invisible chain of fate. She had inexplicably obtained some vague clues from the Magus world's plain will. The opening of the Tower of Destiny, the bloodshed of the War of Destiny, and the appearance of that Witch of Destiny's puppet, everything was related to the first Witch of Destiny. Seriously speaking, after the first Witch of Destiny had been forced to leave the Magus world by the plain will, she had lost a great place to collect the power of destiny. Naturally, she would not give up without a fight. Instead, she used the Tower of Destiny and the War of Destiny to play a quick game of raising a pig. The decline of the Witch of Destiny was, in fact, all caused by the first Witch of Destiny. She used the imprint of her consciousness left in the Magus world's plain law to promote a War of Destiny every few hundred years. Then, she gathered a large number of people favored by destiny in the Tower of Destiny and let the puppet be responsible for presiding over the sacrificial ceremony. Just like that, a new Grade 4 Witch of Destiny would be born without a hitch. When the puppet took the huge power of destiny out of the Magus world and into the void, the first Witch of Destiny would naturally have a way to find it and then devour it. Using this method, she could achieve her goal of collecting the power of destiny in the Magus world. The Witch of Destiny had perished for nearly 1,000 years because she had plundered the power of destiny too ruthlessly last time, which caused a backlash from the Magus world's plain will. Now, after nearly 1,000 years of silence, she sensed that the power of destiny in the Magus world had begun to gather again. She could not help but once again promote a new round of War of Destiny. Unfortunately, under the interference of the plane's consciousness, the puppet avatar she had left behind had unexpectedly died in Alice's hands. This undoubtedly greatly delayed her plan of collecting the new power of destiny, and also caused the future War of Destiny to turn to a branch of destiny that she could not smoothly control. And this time, it was very likely that the mastermind behind the deception which incident was the first Witch of Destiny who had been eyeing Alice covetously. Of course, as Alice's creditor and future husband, Grimm was also very curious about the first Witch of Destiny. Unfortunately, no matter how much he asked, Alice did not mention her name. This also seemed to be related to a strange ability of the Witch of Destiny. Even if you were separated by thousands of mountains and tens of thousands of rivers, even if you were hiding in a different plane millions of miles away, as long as you said or meditated on the name of the Witch of Destiny, she could magically sense everything related to her. It sounded nonsensical and strange, but the truth was just that bizarre. Therefore, before she could block the other party's perception of destiny, Alice would never reveal her name to anyone, of course, including Grimm. Level 8 Orc Core Deity. Wizard Faction. The first Witch of Destiny. Even though Grimm was in the safety of his private wizard's pagoda, he could not help but shiver when he saw these shocking words. He was secretly shocked by the twists and turns of his destiny. If he was just an insignificant, ordinary creature in the wizard world, he would not have any connection to these boring battles between deities. But now, as he became stronger step by step, and Alice had become a powerful helper that he couldn't do without, these illusory and seemingly ridiculous legends had turned into a poisonous thorn in his heart, making him unable to eat or sleep in peace. In the eyes of the first Witch of Destiny, Alice, Grimm, and the rest were just despicable ants that had disrupted her chess game under the control of the plain will. They were not worthy of her treating them as equal opponents. Besides, that Alice was still weak and posed no threat to her at all. Therefore, she could not simply erase Alice's existence. She could only use some crafty plots to slowly clip Alice's wings, thinking of how to use Alice's hand to guide the chaos in front of her onto the right track she had set. It had to be said that becoming a level 2 wizard meant that Grimm and Alice had broken away from the shackles of the lower class, and their horizons had been expanded many times. The various secrets of the world and the secrets of high-level wizards had gradually filled their ears, allowing them to understand the truth of the world hidden behind layers of fog. But the more they knew, the heavier the burden in their hearts. Even with Grimm's strength and confidence, he could only struggle to survive in this strange and bizarre world. Grimm waved his hand to dismiss the beautiful blood elf spellcaster who was constantly reporting information to him. He sighed and finally began to seriously eat the breakfast in front of him. There had always been a saying among the wizards that ridiculed them. Only the wizard who could eat the most was the most powerful wizard. The use of any extraordinary power consumed a shocking amount of energy. Without a strong body, it was impossible to activate a wizard spell that could destroy the world. And where did the energy come from? Naturally, it all came from eating. Therefore, when he could not come up with a good solution to the problem in front of him, Grimm ordered himself to eat as much as he could. Chapter 754. Within a secret magic room, bright but not glaring white magic lamps illuminated every corner of the room. In front of an intricate high-grade alchemy table, Grimm was carefully pouring the molten fire loathsome iron from a magic crucible into a metal mold. When it was in a semi-solid state, he picked up a carving knife and carefully engraved magic patterns and runes on it. This fire-loathsome iron was the best material Grimm could find to make magic bracelets. Its melting point was 9,327 degrees. Due to its high hardness and extraordinary magic resistance, Grimm could only carve the flame spell formation grooves on it when it was in a semi-molten state. In order to prevent a brilliant magus from quickly deciphering the contents of the spell formation, Grimm had to add some decorative patterns and lines to the spell formation system to conceal its original function, in addition to the normal offensive spell formation, energy-gathering spell formation, and support runes. All of this had to be done when the fire-loathsome iron was in a semi-solid state. Grimm estimated that it took about 210 seconds for the bracelet to completely condense from the time it was poured to the time it was completely condensed. During this time, Grimm had to carve 13 offensive spell formations, 25 energy-gathering spell formations, for 121 support runes, and 74 magic patterns. It was easy to imagine the difficulty of carving so much information on a metal bracelet that was 70 centimeters in diameter and 30 centimeters in width. More importantly, the entire process had to be done in one go without any pauses. Otherwise, once the fire-loathsome iron cooled down, even a magic carving knife enchanted with sharpness and armor break would not be able to cut through it. Magic flame temperature reduced by 7 degrees. Grimm used a bit of his spiritual force to connect to the control crystal on the alchemy table and lower the magic flame temperature of 9,800 degrees by an indiscernible 7 degrees. Activating support spell formation 3. Grimm then used a bit of his spiritual force to adjust the alchemy table according to the AI chip's instructions. Magic carving knife infusion completed. After using his spiritual force to activate the sharpness and armor penetration effects of the magic carving knife, Grimm followed the AI chip's instructions and gently placed the tip of the knife on the surface of the half-melted armband. Along with the slight movement of his wrist and the nimble control of his fingers, the hard magic carving knife that was emitting a faint yellow light began to move and twist on the surface of the armband in an unnoticeable manner. The engraved lines and grooves were as thin as a mosquito's silk, but they were dense and continuous. An ordinary person would not be able to see it clearly without a powerful magnifying glass. However, Grimm often had to carve a complete three-dimensional spell formation in an area the size of a grain of rice. In order to complete this difficult task, the blue light in Grimm's black pupils shone like stars. The scanning and magnifying function of the AI chip had been activated to the extreme. The surface of the armband, which was originally only 30 centimeters wide, was magnified 3,000 times by the AI chip. In Grimm's eyes, it was now wide enough for him to splash a brush on it. However, correspondingly, the magic carving knife that was originally as thin as a cicada's wing was now as thick as a stone pillar, and it looked unusually clumsy. Grimm used his nimble fingers and wrist to control the magic carving knife, allowing it to quickly move along the surface of the armband according to the blue lines indicated by the AI chip. During this process, Grimm's wrist and fingers had to be consistent, otherwise the lines and grooves created by the carving knife would be of different depths, greatly affecting the function and effect of the finished product. However, the armband was currently at a terrifying temperature of 6,000 to 7,000 degrees. If not for Grimm being a Grade 2 fire magus, he would not have been able to accurately control the armband at such a close distance. Due to the magical properties of the fire-loath iron, it had an outstanding resistance to the scorching rays. Grimm could only choose to carve it manually. Fortunately, Grimm had nearly 100 years of experience in carving magic crystal cores, so he was able to complete his work without any mishaps. Sighing lightly, Grimm carefully held the half-finished product in his left hand. He used his right hand to pick up a handful of golden quartz sand and scattered it on the surface of the armband. Following a series of golden flashes, most of the quartz sand was absorbed by the armband, causing its surface to turn a glistening yellow. It looked exceptionally dazzling. Quartz sand was a common material used to gather energy in the creation of magic tools. It could also be perfectly fused with the fire-loath iron, so there would not be any elemental repulsion between the two. After all this was done, Grimm finally relaxed and began to look at the half-finished flame emblem armband in his hands. Yes, this was not the final form of the Grade 2 flame emblem armband, but only a half-finished product. This was an exquisite armband made of dark red, fire-repellent iron. The energy-absorbing substance in it resonated with the free elemental particles in the environment, causing a faint layer of bright red light film to linger around the surface of the armband. The AI chip had looked at tens of thousands of similar magic tools before coming up with the final design. The complicated spell formation engraved on it had been optimized and adjusted by the AI chip thousands of times. Looking at this exquisite work of art, Grimm's gaze was a little intoxicated. After fiddling with it for a long time, Grimm reluctantly placed it on the velvet tablecloth of the alchemy lab table. The base of the flame emblem armband had already been completed. All that was left was to completely melt the top-grade fire agate and use a special method to embed it into the densely packed grooves on the surface of the armband. Of course, before that, he still had to mix the fire dragon's blood into a suitable neutralizing agent. This was a rather laborious task. Based on his initial calculations, He would have to work hard for at least a month to complete the armband as soon as possible. After his previous exploration, Grimm understood that only by equipping the 2 pieces of the Blazing Flame Monarch would his plan to explore the fire elemental plane be a little more assured. Grimm rubbed his temples as he calculated his daily schedule for the next month, a faint stabbing pain in his head. Even though the refinement process had only lasted a short 210 seconds, it had made him extremely nervous. The work of refining the base of the armband was also quite taxing on his mind. That was why at this moment, when Grimm had relaxed, he felt a little fatigued. He waved his hand to extinguish the magical flames on the alchemy table and cut off the magical energy supply from the wizard's pagoda to the alchemy table. Grimm could not be bothered to tidy up the alchemy tools and equipment. He yawned and rubbed his eyes as he walked out of the alchemy lab. It was time for a good rest. Snakebird Cliff. The afternoon sun shone through the lush foliage onto the grassland at the bottom of the cliff. 3 snakebird hatchlings were frolicking on the verdant grass, while the other 2 hatchlings were lying in a grass nest, sleeping soundly. Most of the adult snakebird hatchlings had gone out to look for food. Only the 2 female hatchlings remained on the cliff to guard the nest. They crouched lazily in the cave on the cliff, basking in the sun. They would occasionally poke their heads out to check on the hatchlings at the bottom of the cliff. In the innermost corner of the cave behind them, there were 7 or 8 white snake bird eggs with some light yellow spots covering the entire grass nest. There were also some beast bones that had been gnawed clean scattered around the nest. The area within a radius of 30 to 40 miles around the cliff was the hunting area of the snakebird beasts. The overly ferocious beasts and demons had long been chased further away by them. That was why even though most of the adult snakebird beasts had gone out to hunt, the 2 female hatchlings that stayed behind were not worried about the safety of the snakebird cliff. A good chance? A good chance. Pushing aside the weeds in front of them, the apprentices of the Light of Shadow team peeked at the peaceful world with shifty eyes, their hearts bubbling with joy. The adult male snakebird beasts were not around, and there were only 2 female hatchlings at home. This was the best news they could have ever received. After waiting nearby for 2 days, the team of apprentices finally got to work without hesitation. Gomo, 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 with a strange metallic sound, a little metal chick drilled its way out of the black forest with stiff steps, appearing on the green grass that had a radius of half a mile. The attention of the 3 frolicking snakebird hatchlings was immediately attracted. They stopped chasing and crouched down, curiously sizing up this strange fellow that they had never seen before. The little fellows did not sense any dangerous or frightening aura from it, so they did not immediately flee back to their nest. The little metal chick flapped its metal wings and swayed its golden body. It strolled around the edge of the grass, then suddenly shrieked and turned to flee back into the black forest. When the 3 hatchlings, who loved to kill, saw this, they immediately flapped their thin wings excitedly and chased after it. Just like that, the 3 big and 1 small quickly disappeared into the black forest. A moment later, the female hatchlings that had been lying peacefully at the entrance of the cliff's nest poked out its snake-like head again. This time, it was startled to find that the figures of the 3 hatchlings were missing from the grass. The female hatchlings immediately raised its neck and shrieked. The strange shriek contained the crispness of birds, but also the hissing noise of snakes. The mournful shriek immediately echoed around the high cliff for a long time. In the next moment, the 2 female snakebird hatchlings flew out of their nest and began to circle around the snakebird cliff, flying high and low, anxiously searching for the missing 3 hatchlings. After the 2 sleeping hatchlings woke up, they fled back to their nests in panic. The 2 female hatchlings landed on the grass, their snake-like heads flicking in and out their bright red tongues. Soon, they found the whereabouts of the 3 hatchlings in the air. Chapter 755. Before they had even traveled 2 miles, the female beast had already discovered traces of the 3 cubs. Near a pile of rocks in the woods, the three baby beasts were curled up together, with their heads hanging softly by their sides. Their calf-sized bodies didn't move at all. The female snake bird let out a high-pitched scream and swooped down from the top of the woods, breaking many ancient branches along the way. Its strange body, which was as fierce as a lion and a tiger, landed heavily in the bushes, leaving a deep ditch on the ground. The female snake bird was 2 times smaller than the male snake bird, and its feathers were much brighter. They might not be as strong as the male snake bird, but their flying speed and the fierceness of their venom were much better. The female snake bird jumped to the pile of rocks, and sensed the thriving life force of the baby beast once its 1.5-meter long snake-shaped head touched the baby beast's body. The baby beast didn't die. The female snake bird finally calmed down. However, when it used its snake-like head to lightly touch the cub, a small round metal ball rolled out from under the cub's body, rolling all the way until it lightly bumped into its slender and long bird leg. What was this? The female snake bird bent its body and curiously looked at this strange object. Suddenly, tens of small holes appeared on the metal ball, from which a dense stream of green, poisonous smoke spurted out. The poisonous smoke swallowed the female snake bird's body within a second. The female snake bird retreated in fear, but before it could get out of the range of the poisonous smoke, its strange half-snake, half-bird body swayed inexplicably, and it staggered like a hangover drunkard. The poisonous smoke was indeed poisonous, and it was extremely poisonous. Unfortunately, facing a poisonous creature, this little bit of poison still couldn't kill it instantly. Swoosh! A strong wind roared, and a strong bald man jumped out from a bush nearby. The long blade held in his hand brought up a strong gust of wind and smashed on the female snakebird's head. The female snakebird was at most as powerful as a quasimagus. Although its snake-shaped head was protected by dense snake scales, it still couldn't withstand such a fierce strike. If the bald brute hadn't used the back of his saber in order to capture the snake alive, his 9 points of strength would have been enough to decapitate the snake's head. With a dull thud, the scale-covered head of the female snakebird was smashed into a bloody mess. Fortunately, its eyeballs were not directly blown out. The female snakebird let out a shrill cry, swayed a few times, and finally fell down heavily. Before it fainted, the female snakebird's pupils reflected a few hideous human figures surrounding it. "It's fallen! Fallen!" Blanc pinched his throat and burst into wild laughter. The apprentices gathered around him all had a satisfied smile on their faces. "What do you say, Boss Pang? Should we stop now or continue?" "Of course we have to work harder." Pseudo-Sorcerer Ponder's face was also filled with a sinister smile. There are still 3 hours before nightfall, and those male beasts won't be back so early. We can take this opportunity to wipe out their nest. Don't forget, the most valuable part of the snakebirds are their eggs. Then we have to be quick. We have to find a place to hide after searching the nest, in case those male beasts find us. Daxos, an apprentice with a blood-stained saber in his hand, urged in a muffled voice. "Let's go. Eek, you and Locke stay here and bring them back to their hiding place. We'll meet up with you after searching the nest." Ponter ordered decisively. "You guys be careful," Eek said affectionately. In the blink of an eye, the 3 of them disappeared into the forest. After looking for a while and waiting for the 3 of them to completely disappear, Eek retracted her gaze and sighed softly. "Let's hurry up and do it." "All right," Locke replied, and took out 7 or 8 pieces of metal magic equipment from his waist pouch. He then quickly assembled them in the clearing in the forest. In less than half a quarter of an hour, a 3-meter-tall, miniature magical machine warrior with a somewhat thin body was basically formed. Locke laboriously pulled open the partition on the back of the magic mechanical warrior and carefully inserted 3 sets of magic batteries into the card slot. Therefore, in the next second, with a noisy metal friction sound, the mini version of the magic machine warrior rose from the ground and stood tall in front of the 2 of them. Magic Mechanical Engineer JY001 reporting for duty. Please give your instructions. In front of the tall magical machine warrior the little goblin, who was only a meter tall, seemed even smaller. However, in front of his own magic mechanical creation, Locke was more energetic and confident than ever. "Don't just stand here like a fool. Hurry up and carry all the prey on my back. We're about to run." Locke jumped and gestured and finally gave his first order. The entire body of the magic mechanical warrior was made of old and broken scrap metal. There was no trace of any high-level magic mechanical weapons on its body at all. The only thing that could be called a weapon was probably the pair of huge metal pincers. Although the arcane machine engineer's energy source came from magical batteries, the steam valves, brake switches, suspension systems, as well as the dense gears and metal rods that kept turning and snapping could still be seen on its jumbled shell. After receiving the order, the magic mechanical engineer came to the female snakebird and the 3 cubs with heavy footsteps and threw them on its shoulders one by one. Then, it quickly followed the little goblin and the female apprentice to the hidden place they arranged. Meanwhile, at Snakebird Cliff, the female snakebird that was guarding the place soared in the sky with all its might. From time to time, it swooped down and used its terrifying venomous kiss and sharp bird claws to attack the intruders that suddenly appeared. Unfortunately, although it had the strength of a quasi-wizard, it was unarmed. It could only rely on its strong body to fight the 3 human apprentices who were armed to the teeth. Among the 3, there was a quasi-wizard of darkness who was not inferior to it. The female snakebird's attacks were all blocked by Daxo, who was a body refinery apprentice. Daxo calmly blocked all the attacks from the female snakebird, creating the best environment for his 2 companions to cast spells. The quasi-wizard Ponder's shadow arrows and Blank's armor-piercing crossbow both caused a lot of damage to the female snakebird. In particular, the continuous shadow arrows had a very high probability of ignoring defense. Every time they hit the female snakebird's body, a large part of its iron feathers and skin would be corroded, revealing the bright red flesh underneath. Therefore, after fighting for a quarter of an hour, the severely injured female snakebird knew that it could not fight these intruders. It could only shriek mournfully and soar into the sky, escaping into the depths of the forest. "Want to send a message? Stay right here." The quasi-wizard Ponter, who had been secretly accumulating his power, let out a hideous grin and rushed to catch up with the female snakebird. The dark energy in his hand madly gathered into the shape of a dark spear. Then, as he threw it with great force, it quickly caught up with the female snakebird and penetrated its body. The female snakebird finally soared into the sky with a mournful cry. "Daxo, go and bring its body back. Blanc, come into the nest with me." Seeing that victory was in sight, the 3 of them immediately split up and began to clean up the battle for the day. However, just as the 3 of them hurriedly searched the entire snakebird cliff and packed up all the eggs and young snakebirds, a strange roar suddenly came from the distant sky. "Damn it! Those male snakebirds have returned to their nest. Let's go." Ponder's expression immediately changed. He did not have the time to carefully inspect the inside and outside of the nest. He whistled and fled with his 2 companions. There were as many as 17 adult snakebirds living in the snakebird cliff. They had killed 2 of them, and there were still 15 left. Those were 15 quasi-magi level snakebird beasts. Once they were trapped in the nest, no matter how well prepared they were and how well equipped they would not be able to withstand the attacks of the snakebirds. The 3 of them had killed their wives and stolen their eggs. If they were to fall into the hands of the snakebirds, their fates would be extremely miserable. Therefore, without needing Ponder to urge them, Daxo and Blanc immediately carried their huge bags and ran down the snakebird cliff. The quasi-sorcerer Ponder stayed behind. He kept scattering strange yellow powder behind him as he retreated. This alchemy powder could effectively interfere with the residual smell in the air, rendering all the tracking monsters helpless. However, it was still a little dangerous to rely on this method to get rid of the snakebirds. Ponder quickly took out a magic wand and whispered a few words. A moment later, the goblin Locke, who had received the message, released his eyeball mech. It screeched and rushed into the sky, shooting randomly at the snake birds that had just rushed over. This kind of attack power was only 11 degrees, and it could not kill the snake birds at all. It could only make them scream a few times in pain. After attracting the attention of all the snake birds, the eyeball mech turned around and fled without a care. Relying on the high-temperature flames behind it, it flew towards the periphery of the Black Forest. The snake birds that had hurried back did not even have time to understand the situation before they were provoked by the eyeball mech. They shrieked and flapped their wings, disappearing into the forest in the blink of an eye. Shoo! Seeing that the snake birds had been lured away, the three of them finally relaxed and calmly returned to their hiding place with the loot they had plundered. The hideout was a deep pit that Locke commanded the magical mechanical engineers to dig in a clearing in the forest. The top was covered with wooden planks and green vines. The concealment effect was even better than the caves and crevices in the rocks. Locke, you've done well. When we get back, you'll have share of the loot this time. Pawner was obviously very satisfied with Locke's performance, and finally recognized him as a teammate for the first time. Thank you, boss. Thank you, boss, that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.